day after Shauna and her entourage arrived in the Rigel continent, Marion and the Valkyries, who numbered over 500, went to visit the 69th Battalion on Sector 13. "He's younger than I thought he would be," one of the Valkyries whispered to her friend after finally seeing the most famous rookie in the world. "Right. Did he really fight against a Magian prince?" another Valkyrie asked. "I can easily crush his head like a watermelon without any problems." Well, those stories might just be an exaggeration of what really happened. Maybe he was just there, watching the battle from the sidelines. Well, Rihanna said that he was fighting in the front lines, but she was guarding the Grand Ballista, so she can't be sure if he really fought the Magian prince, right? The Valkyries, composed of only female wanderers, talked without even bothering to lower their voice. It was as if they were trying to see how Zion Leventis would react to their words. Christopher and Colbert, who were respectively 13th's left and right-hand men, frowned as they looked at the beautiful ladies whom they were ogling earlier. After hearing their words, they looked at the ladies in disdain, as if they were staring at pigs who had been rolling around in filth for an entire day. Perhaps noticing the two's disgusted expression, the Valkyries all glared at them. However, the two weren't fazed at all and even confidently matched the ladies' gazes with a contemptuous look, as if they were insignificant creatures that held no importance whatsoever. Battalion commander, Marion saluted the teenage boy, who was nearly half her age. "Forgive my girls. They're just talking nonsense." "Don't worry, ma'am," 13 replied as he saluted back to Marion. "I'm already used to it." His subordinates had also acted like that when they first joined his battalion. Now, they had somewhat turned into decent and very loyal soldiers who no longer questioned his every order. "Zion, I'd appreciate it if we don't talk formally," Marion said with a smile. "I don't want a stiff environment, so just be casual, okay?" "Understood." 13 nodded. "Have you all been briefed about the rules set by the Dvalin Federation for all the outsider groups entering the Rigel continent?" "Yes," Marion replied. "The one I dislike the most is the flying ban. We mostly use Pegasus avatars, so not being able to use them will limit our fighting abilities. The moment any of you ride those Pegasus and fly to the sky is the moment you die," Miss Marion, 13 said in a serious tone. "That might work in Solterra, but the Rigel continent is different. There are rank 6 up to rank 9 sovereigns wandering these lands. Some of the Jinns and Magians can fly, so if you're seen riding on avatars in the sky, you will definitely become their target. Please, I cannot stress how important it is for you to follow the flight ban, as if your life depended on it." "You heard him, girls," Marion stated as he glanced at her Valkyries. "No flying or you die. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, ma'am." The Valkyries raised their voice as if trying to intimidate the 69th Battalion with the intensity of their reply. No shouting as well. 13 couldn't help but facepalm after hearing the girls reply loudly. The Valkyries looked at him with amusement, but 13 didn't even bother to look at them and raised his hand, signaling his members to all go into battle mode. The members of the 69th Battalion, who were eating, reading, and chatting with each other, immediately abandoned whatever they were doing and lightly tapped the badge on their right shoulder. Soon, the bodies of the soldiers were covered in light green military armor, which made the Valkyries flinch due to how bright their colors were. Without caring what the ladies thought, 13th subordinates all summoned their avatars. When the ladies saw that all of the members of the 69th Battalion, with the exception of a few oddballs, had rank for Alpha Knight wolves as their mount, all of them flinched. The giant wolves, which were as black as night, all crouched down to make it easier for their respective masters to mount them. 13, who had no avatar of his own, stood on a hoverboard powered by Imperium, which slowly floated a meter above the ground. "Miss Marion, make sure that none of your members ride their flying mounts. We don't want a disaster in our hands," 13 stated. Before Marion could even ask what was happening, they heard loud roars coming from the distance. The base 13 had chosen for his people was an elevated slope, giving them a better view of their surroundings. The sounds of countless hooves running in their direction alarmed the Valkyries, who didn't know that Sector 13 was a place frequently visited by Jinns that always traveled in groups. "Sir, Goblin Riders spotted," reported Christopher, who was using a binocular to take a closer look at the approaching monsters. The goblin riders were composed of hobgoblins that were riding on wargs. These monsters, which were mostly rank 2 and rank 3, were some of the most common creatures inhabiting the area where 13 and his men were stationed. "Deal with it," 13 ordered. Immediately, the 69th Battalion charged toward the enemy horde. However, just as the Shauna, Marion, and the Valkyries thought that they would engage in close combat, Alexis and Paul, who were in the lead, made their night wolves run sideways. The soldiers running behind them followed suit. Silencer mode, Alexis ordered as he aimed his assault rifle at the monsters that were within his shooting range. Fire at will. Muffled sounds escaped the tip of their assault rifles as their armor-piercing rounds landed on their target. The Wanderers didn't even need to put much effort into aiming. With how tightly the enemies were grouped, their gunfire would hit their targets without fail. The Goblin Captain, who was a rank 4 alpha monster, immediately shouted its orders to follow the annoying night wolves, who seemed to be shooting in their direction. Since they couldn't see the soldiers properly due to their light green armor, they thought that the night wolves were using some kind of trick to annihilate them. The goblin archers retaliated, but the night wolves were simply too fast and immediately distanced themselves from their enemies. After evolving into an alpha monster, their speed, agility, and strength had increased drastically, making it impossible for the wargs, which the hobgoblins were riding, to catch up to them. 13 had taught the 69th Battalion a simple battle strategy. Hit your opponents, but don't let them hit you back. This tactic was what allowed them to thrive in Sector 13, where a battle could erupt at any moment. After weeks of fighting as a team, they had grown familiar with using each other's strengths to their advantage. Christopher, Colbert, Pietro, and Piper, who were riding on blaze skunks, weren't moving as fast as their comrades. In fact, they were at dead last because blaze skunks weren't monsters who specialized in speed. Seeing that there were stragglers behind, the goblins decided to change their targets and aim for the 4 skunks, whom they planned to vent their anger. However, when these skunks all turned around and raised their tail, a very bad feeling crept into the minds of the hobgoblins, who had stepped into the 50-meter mark range of the blaze skunks. Without any warning, the 4 blaze skunks unleashed a flaming spray that instantly made every monster they hit scream in pain. Just like giant flamethrowers, the blaze skunks burned down their enemies, with some of them even melting on the spot due to the acid that was imbued on the hellish flames. But that wasn't all. The flames were also very foul-smelling, making the wargs, who had sensitive noses, disoriented. They flailed around, sending their riders flying off their backs. While this was happening, the night wolves turned around and annihilated the stragglers who had fallen into disarray. The goblin captain had already died after being bombarded with the combined firepower of the 4 blaze skunks, so there was no longer anyone who would give them any orders. Since they had lost their leaders, the first thing that the goblins did was run. Unfortunately, they couldn't outrun the night wolves, so they were killed one by one until only their corpses remained on the battlefield. The Valkyries, who watched the battle from start to end, were stunned because they didn't expect to see such a scene after they arrived in the Rigel continent. The majority of them thought of the 69th Battalion as a joke, but after seeing them in action, they believed that they wouldn't be able to fight as effectively as them, which made them look at the teenage boy, who was looking at his subordinates with a faint smile on his face. After the battle ended, the 69th Battalion divided themselves into 3 groups, each consisting of 100 wanderers. The first team harvested the cores of the monsters, as well as any other valuable monster parts. The second team encircled the first team and stood guard, keeping their attention to their surroundings. The third team, on the other hand, scouted ahead in order to check if the battle had alerted any other monster hordes in the area, which could potentially threaten their comrades, who were busy retrieving their spoils of war. "I have to apologize to you," Zion, Marion said. "I came here thinking that you and your men are just playing house here in the Rigel continent. Did you teach them this strategy?" "I did." 13 nodded. "I advised the Valkyries to change their mounts. We don't want to risk any of you ordering your mount to fly out of habit. Sector 13 is an area surrounded by monsters ranging from rank 1 up to rank 5. We're stationed here to also make sure that no monsters would venture near Sector 5, where the Imperia mine is located. If the Valkyries plan to observe and cooperate with us, you should seriously consider temporarily switching to non-flying mounts. I'm not saying this out of spite to any of you, but having flying avatars on this continent is a liability instead of an advantage. Marion nodded because he knew that 13 was telling them the truth. Then we'll ask the Dvalin Federation if they can give us 500 Night Wolves as well. I'm quite impressed. I didn't think that they would have so many alpha monsters. Do you think they still have a few to spare? 13 looked at Marion weirdly. However, after careful consideration, he realized that the Dvalin Federation might have done a cover-up to prevent the news of the mass avatar evolution event from spreading. The Dvalin Federation have Night Wolves to spare, but they're just ordinary Night Wolves, 13 commented. The Night Wolves of my subordinates evolved a few days ago, and this is the result of their evolution. Ha ha, nice joke. Marion laughed as she lightly patted 13's shoulder. I almost believed you there, Zion. I mean, how can so many Night Wolves evolve at once and become alpha monsters? If that was easy to do, then the military would have a field day. 13 paused for a bit before nodding his head. He already told Marion the truth, but since she didn't want to believe him, he would just let her think whatever she wanted to think. An hour later, the 69th Battalion returned to their camp and resumed whatever they were doing earlier. Al Capone, you and Pietro will be on drone duty, 13 ordered, making the leader of the Mafia boys groan. The leader of the Mafia boys groaned because 13 always asked him to do odd jobs whenever there was an opportunity. His brothers from his group all gave him a thumbs up before taking a nap at their respective tents, making sure that Al Capone's sacrifice was worth it. All the members of the 69th Battalion were each given a drone and taught how to operate it. 13 gave them many methods on how to survive, and this was one of them. Just like their military uniforms, their drones were also light green in color. If humans were too blinded by their color scheme, the jinns, on the other hand, were having a hard time understanding what they were looking at because it had a color that effectively merged with its surroundings. While Pietro and Al Capone did guard duty, 13 lit up a small stove in order to cook his lunch. The 69th Battalion was taught to be self-sufficient, so they didn't have any cooks responsible for preparing meals for everyone. As 13 was setting up his stove and ingredients, Shauna crouched beside him and asked a question. What is it like to face a Magian prince? Shauna asked. 13 glanced at the young lady, who was older than him by 3 years for a few seconds before shifting his attention back to the portable stove in front of him. What is the rank of the most horrifying monster you faced on the battlefield? 13 asked as he poured water into a pot, after which he placed it over the stove to boil the water. A rank 5 Python overlord, Shauna answered as she gazed in the distance, reminiscing about that fateful encounter. I met one 2 years ago. I was just a rookie at that time, so when I saw that monster, I felt like death was staring at me in the face. Fortunately, it wasn't a djinn, and it had just eaten a large meal, so it left me alone. I really thought that I was going to die back then. I even have nightmares of it from time to time. 13 nodded. Facing a Magian prince is like that as well. It doesn't have to be complicated. Ranks don't mean anything. If you face death, it's all the same. Shauna pondered Zion's words and then shifted her attention to Tiona, who was coiled up in Zion's neck. You're not afraid of snakes, are you? Shauna asked with a smile. No, 13 replied. I have a fondness for them. Domini mortis are extremely rare, right? Shauna inquired. And this one seems to have taken a great liking to you. How did you tame it? I didn't tame her, 13 replied. Tiona was a monster about to be auctioned, and I was the one that bought her. I don't see any slave marks on her, though. Shauna carefully observed the black snake's head because the mark of slavery would usually be seen on top of a monster's head or at their foreheads. I asked the slave master to remove her mark, 13 said. I'm not a big fan of slavery. Tiona glanced at her master weirdly. Taiga, the orcs, and the trolls were all 13 slaves, and he sure enjoyed tormenting them in the past. The black snake decided that it wasn't worth it to correct her master, so she just shook her head helplessly. Slavery is not good. Shauna nodded. My sister bought some slaves during her first wandering, and she freed them all. They are now part of her group, and they often travel together in Solterra to do missions together. 6 years ago, your sister was a very naive girl, 13 stated, not caring that Shauna immediately pouted after he bad. Mouthed Rihanna. She did buy the slaves, but she didn't know what to do with them after buying them. I was the one who rented a warehouse so that they would have a place to stay and rest. Your sister is too righteous and a goody two-shoes. I hope she has changed since the last time I saw her. If not, I'll flick her forehead for being as stupid as she was in the past. You're the only person that I know who can say those words without worrying about its consequences, Shauna replied, not knowing if she should be impressed or offended because Zion was bad-mouthing her sister. Shauna, your sister is a very capable person, but she has a habit of taking on tasks above her league, 13 said as he looked at the water that was starting to boil. I hope that you're not the same. People expect a lot of things from me, but I don't care about their expectations. I'm sure you also carry the same burdens on your shoulders. So, whenever you feel like wanting to meet the expectations of others, I want you to remember me. Zion Leventis, is more popular, more awesome, more charming, more charismatic, and the most powerful rookie in the world. If someone like me can shrug off the expectations of others, what is stopping you from doing the same? You have been given the label of the saintess, but you don't have to act like a saint. After all, no one in this world can be truly a saint. 13 took out a pack of instant noodles from his storage ring, which made Shauna blink twice after seeing the packaging. 13's face was plastered on the package, and it read, Zion's Instant Noodles Original Flavor. 13 glanced at the young lady, who was looking at the noodle pack in his hands with a serious expression on her beautiful face. Do you want to try it? 13 asked. This will be released in the market after a month. It contains all the important vitamins and nutrients. Also, it doesn't have MSG. Why not? Shauna was very curious about what the noodles tasted like. However, 5 minutes later, her face turned pale. Zion's instant noodles tasted like bubblegum, which made her almost spit the food that was inside her mouth. Zion, don't release this to the market. I beg of you, Shauna said as she held 13's arm, who was happily eating his instant noodles as if it was the most delicious thing in the world. Why? 13 asked. It tastes like bubblegum, Shauna replied. In short, it sucks. You mean I won't earn money from this? No. I'm also starting to think that your taste buds must be dead. No one in their right mind would eat something like this. The members of the 69th Battalion, who were listening to their conversation, all nodded their heads in silence. They, too, had once been tricked by their commander to try his original flavor noodles, which they believed was the most horrendous thing that they had eaten since instant noodles were invented. 13 glanced at Tiona, who was also eating the noodles with him. The black snake reluctantly nodded her head and told her master that it didn't really taste good. On that same day, with the help of the saintess, 13's noodle franchise ended. It didn't even get a chance to see the light of day, which prevented a calamity from descending upon the world. However, this wouldn't be the first nor the last of 13's business practices that would almost bring the entirety of Pangea to its knees. I didn't expect that the Rigel continent would be this peaceful, Shauna said as she viewed the surrounding scenery from 13's Humvee, which Christopher was driving. Peaceful? Well, if you're talking about our current situation, yeah, you can say it's peaceful, 13 replied. Were you expecting that you'll be attacked by hordes of jinns and magians without in the moment you step foot into this continent? The young lady nodded. It was true that she had such thoughts before arriving at the continent, which had long fallen under the control of the jinns and magians. Shauna, ever since this continent's fall, the Battalion Federation had only liberated 12 sectors of this land. Each sector has a size of about 1 square kilometer. Combined, that is only 12 square kilometers of land. The Rigel continent is the second largest continent in Pangea, second only to Sirius. The territories that the Battalion Federation had secured through countless sacrifices are merely a small drop in a bucket of water. Of course, the jinns and magians know that the Battalion Federation is trying to reclaim their land, but all the sectors combined are too small for the true rulers of this place to care. In their point of view, the efforts of the Battalion Federation are a mere fool's errand. Only if the entirety of humanity work together will there be a chance to liberate this place. The powerhouses of the jinns and magians are at the center of this continent. The monsters we are fighting right now are mere small fries. Shauna frowned and shifted her gaze toward the teenage boy, who was checking his communicator to see the current situation around them. If all the champions of the Battalion Federation, as well as their monarch, work together, I'm sure they could retrieve more lands, Shauna stated. Even your battalion managed to secure the 13th sector with just yourselves. Doesn't that mean that they can do better? 13 chuckled. Shauna's words made it clear to him that she truly didn't know how terrifying jinns and magians could be. You're part of the hero party, right? 13 asked. Usually, what kind of missions do you all do together? We fight jinns and magians wreaking havoc near the major cities in Solterra, Shauna replied. If there is a tier 3-dimensional gate, we will also mobilize to intercept them. The hero of your party is 19 years old, and he is already of the master rank, 13 stated. That's pretty impressive. He is absolutely a prodigy, second only to me. Why is he second only to you? The frown on Shauna's face deepened. You're only of the rookie rank, so he's several times stronger, yes? You're 3 years older than me, and you just recently stepped into the elite rank, 13 commented. This also means that you are one of the strongest wanderers of this generation. Shauna, who had been praised by 13, felt happy. Her sister, Rihanna, had practically treated Zion as an idol to worship, so hearing that same idol praising her now made her happy. However, that happiness didn't last long and was cut off the moment 13 added to his words. You and that hero of your party are both strong, but what are the strongest monsters you've faced in a battle? 13 asked. Rank 4 sovereigns, Shauna replied, feeling very proud of her achievement. 13 looked at the smug-faced girl before asking Christopher a question. Christopher, how strong was the enemy we faced? 13 inquired. Magian Prince, Christopher replied with pride. He also has an army composed of 2 rank 9 sovereigns and dozens of higher-ranking monsters. 13 then shifted his attention back to the girl, who now had a stiff smile on her face. Both you and that hero of yours should do better, 13 replied with a smile. I mean, I wasn't even a rookie when I faced Arundel, yet I won against him. So, how can you possibly compare that hero to me, who can only fight rank 4 sovereigns with a party of wanderers? Hello, can't you see the disparity in strength between us? But. Shauna tried to counter 13's argument, but the boy only gave her the okay, say something that can surpass my achievement gaze, which made the young lady pout. Shauna, if you only gauge people because of their rank, you will become one of those snot-nosed snobbish celebrities who look down on people with lower standing, 13 said in a serious tone. While ranks are important, they're not absolute. I don't want to toot my own horn, but even if the monarchs grouped together and fought against Arundel, they would all die a dog's death. How about I remind you of the power scaling of the ranks that you look up to the most? 13 smirked before raising a single finger. A champion can fight against a rank 6 monster, 13 stated. But they can't fight against a rank 6 overlord on their own, 13 explained. In order to effectively fight against a monster of that rank, for champions need to work together as a team. If they are fighting a rank 6 sovereign, they need 6 champions to get the job done. However, this is not an absolute estimate because there are always exceptions. Not all champions are equal, and there will always be someone who excels more than others. Let's take Benedict Riggs as an example. He is a peak stage champion, and because of his strength, he is recognized as one of the top 5 big shots of the Riggs family. Someone like him can face off against a rank 6 overlord alone, and depending on the situation, he could probably defeat a rank 6 sovereign as well. Thrones can effectively fight against rank 7 sovereigns, and monarchs can fight rank 8 sovereigns. But if they'll have to face a rank 9 sovereign, 3 to 5 monarchs are needed to fight one. But just like us, there are also exceptions to the Jinn race. Not all rank 8 and 9 sovereigns are equal. There are monsters who overshadow their peers. So if these monsters meet ordinary wanderers, even champions, thrones, and monarchs can die after facing them. This is also the reason why the monarchs refused to fight the Jinns and Antares, causing the first continent to helplessly fall. They tried to right their wrongs by fighting here in the Rigel continent, but it made them realize that the strength they possessed was not enough. 13's voice was filled with contempt as he talked about the monarchs, who gained their powers through foul means. Because of this, the 5 monarchs of the monarch clans were the weakest monarchs in the world. Only the monarch of the central government, who had fought on the front lines, was actually considered strong. The omnipotent guardian of Solterra and Pangea was both a fair and unfair god. He would give the wanderers unfair missions, but he would be fair when it came to rewarding them for their achievements. Had the 5 monarchs fought with everything they had, forget about getting mythical weapons, they might have been awarded a complete set of legendary weapons, making them true powerhouses in every sense of the world. Simply put, the mythical weapon and the abilities they gained after dealing the last blow to a half-dead monster were merely the consolation prize that Laplace Demon and the One had given them. So in 13's point of view, the 5 monarch clans was a joke. If his host hadn't died, he would have become the strongest existence in Pangea and would have led humanity to a better future. Unfortunately, his host wasn't able to live to see that day, which was something that 13 wouldn't be able to forgive. Right now, he was still too weak to avenge his host, but the moment he completed his preparations, he would exact his vengeance. Just as 13 was about to say more, the communicator in his wrist suddenly emitted a warning sound, making his face turn grim. "Commander, there's an emergency." Al Capone's voice, which was filled with panic, reverberated inside the Humvee. A squad of Valkyries summoned their avatars to fly in the sky, and they caught the attention of a rank 6 Sovereign Rock. "We're trying to give them cover fire, but the Rock has a dozen giant eagles as subordinates. We're completely outmatched and forced to retreat." 13 cursed internally as his face turned serious. He had already warned the Valkyries to never use their flying avatars because this was a taboo thing to do in the Rigel continent. The Battalion Federation had learned this the hard way, and hundreds of their elite wanderers had died after these flying monsters attacked them without mercy. "Christopher," 13 shouted. "On it, sir." Christopher stepped on the acceleration of the Humvee, making the vehicle zoom across the rugged terrain, heading into the place where a battle was already taking place. 15 minutes before, Al Capone called 13. "Hey, this scouting mission is taking forever." One of the Valkyries complained as they rode behind the 69th Battalion. The armor of the Green Lanterns was nearly blinding, so they were wearing sunglasses, which the Battalion Federation had provided for them. "I know, right? If only we could fly in the sky, then we could have already mapped the entire surroundings in less than 5 minutes. Another Valkyrie replied. "There are only rank 1 up to rank 3 monsters so far. This place is at the very edge of the continent. I reckon that even if we fly, we'd only be facing rank 3 flying monsters at most. We can easily kill those things." "Captain, how about we just do it?" the prettiest Valkyrie in the group asked. "We'll just fly for a minute or 2 and complete this scouting mission. After that, we can return to the base. We want you to spend an hour or 2 following these guys." Viola, the captain of the squad of 12 Valkyries, pondered for a bit as she considered her member's suggestion. Their commander had briefed them that flying was strictly not allowed, so they had no choice but to rent night wolves from the Battalion Federation and use them as temporary mounts. However, the Valkyries were used to traveling and fighting in the skies. Making them travel on land was giving them an itch that they couldn't scratch, so they were getting more and more restless. "We can't do it." Viola shook her head. "The commander's orders are absolute." All the Valkyries sighed after hearing their captain's words. In the end, they decided to endure and follow behind the 69th Battalion, feeling miserable that they were the squad chosen to accompany the battalion in this scouting mission. Suddenly, the formation of the 69th Battalion changed, and one of them decelerated to inform the Valkyries why they were changing their formation and route. "Our scouts have spotted a giant eagle heading in our direction," Pietro, who was at the rear of the formation, said. "We will be doing an evasive maneuver and prepare to engage it just in case it decides to attack us." The Valkyries all nodded in understanding, but deep inside, all of them were feeling excited. They had seen how the 69th Battalion fought on the battlefield. Their teamwork and strategy were very amazing, so the Valkyries were thinking about showing off what they could do. Unfortunately, flying was banned, so they couldn't execute their strongest formations. They were also not used to riding night wolves, so their strategies wouldn't be as effective compared to when they were riding their Pegasus in the sky. When the giant eagle appeared in their location, it saw hundreds of night wolves running together. However, its gaze focused on the back of the group, focusing on the 12 Valkyries who had caught its attention. Unlike the Green Lanterns, who were nearly invisible in its eyes, it could see the Valkyries were as clear as day. Because of this, it didn't hesitate to dive down and target the Valkyries, who all grinned at the same time. "Captain, it's targeting us," one of the Valkyries said. "Maybe it's thinking that we're just small fries." "Captain, this is self-defense, and the enemy is a flying monster," the prettiest among the Valkyries commented. "Isn't this a good reason to engage it in combat? After all, we are being attacked by it." Viola thought that this was indeed a legitimate reason to use their flying mounts to engage the opponent. Since it was self-defense, and they were only dealing with one opponent, she believed it was justified to temporarily lift the flight ban and engage in combat. "Formation Deadless," Viola ordered, making the Valkyries cheer together. They unsummoned their night wolves and summoned their Pegasus. As they rose to the skies, they felt liberated, as if they had just been freed from prison. The giant eagle, which was a rank 5 monster, screeched and attacked them, but the Valkyries easily dodged the attack with fearless smiles on their faces. They might not be good in land battles, but in the air, they were confident in their abilities. After dodging the giant eagle's attacks, they unleashed their own abilities. The prettiest among the Valkyries unleashed silver chains, making it wrap around one of the giant eagle's wings. "Eat this." The Valkyrie then unleashed an electric attack, which she transmitted through her chains, making the giant eagle screech in pain. Viola used that opportunity to summon several flaming spears and shot them to the wing, being restricted by the silver chains. Their protocol for dealing with flying monsters was to destroy their wings, making them lose their ability to fly. Once their enemy was on the ground, they could take their time eliminating it with their aerial superiority. The other Valkyries also unleashed offensive attacks, targeting the wing bound by the silver chains. Half a minute later, the giant eagle screeched helplessly as it lost its ability to fly, causing it to crash to the ground. Viola and her squad exchanged knowing looks with each other as they all dived down from the sky to finish off their prey. Although it was a rank 5 monster, the Valkyries were all masters except Viola, who was a grandmaster. As long as they worked together, it would be very easy for them to eliminate a mere rank 5 giant eagle. Perhaps, thinking that this was an opportunity to show off their prowess, the Valkyries took their sweet time in attacking the giant eagle, who had lost its ability to fly. But before it breathed its last, it let out an ear-piercing screech, forcing Viola to give it the killing blow. The giant eagle finally collapsed, dying at the hands of the Valkyries, who had toyed with it before going for the kill. Just as the Valkyries were about to celebrate their first battle in the Rigel continent, several screeches spread in the sky, making the Valkyries, as well as the 69th Battalion, look to the north. There, they saw a bird, which was 3 times larger than the giant eagle, heading in their direction. Behind the giant bird were giant eagles, who were all looking at the Valkyries with eyes filled with killing intent. Viola, who sensed that the current opponent was way out of their league, immediately ordered a hasty retreat. However, the rock wouldn't allow the ones who killed its subordinates to get away so easily. With a single flap of its mighty wings, it traveled hundreds of meters in an instant. Just like its subordinates, it only wanted to do one thing: feast on the flesh of wanderers and make them pay dearly for the crime of killing their brethren, who had died a very pitiful death in their hands. "Captain, what should we do?" one of the Valkyries anxiously asked, having sensed just how strong the rock was. If they were to fight against just the giant eagles, then they wouldn't need to worry about anything. But things were completely different when facing off against a rank 6 sovereign who was almost upon them. Aegis formation, Viola ordered, cueing all the Pegasus to fly closely together. She knew that it was impossible to escape the rank 6 rock, which was one of the fastest flying djinns in existence. All the Valkyries had grim expressions on their faces. They were only of the master rank, and even their captain, Viola, was a mere grandmaster. They were simply too weak to fight against a rank 6 sovereign, which was normally dealt by several champions who specialized in fighting against flying monsters. Activate the barriers to the max, Viola commanded. All the Valkyries had been given special artifacts that created a barrier, which they used to block projectiles, as well as any kind of attacks targeting them from the air. The barrier formed just as the rock increased its speed, appearing only a few dozen meters from them. A few seconds later, screams of fright reverberated in the sky as their combined barrier cracked after the rock collided with it. Viola's face paled because their strongest defense was almost shattered with just a single blow from the flying monster, who had now circled back to attack them for a second time. The rock screeched in anger and once again flapped its wings, creating a sonic boom behind it. The sound of breaking glasses reverberated in the surroundings as the barrier of the Valkyrie shattered, followed by a horrified scream. The rock had snagged one of the Valkyries off of her flying mount, making her friend, who was hovering beside her, scream in fright. "Dive down, now!" Viola shouted, snapping her squad back to focus. The Valkyries made a nosedive toward the ground, heading to the 69th Battalion, which was retreating as fast as they could from the battlefield. They had no other place to go, and if they wanted to survive, they would need as much help as they could get in fending off the flying monsters who were using numbers to make a difference. Al Capone had contacted 13 when the flying monsters were spotted, and their battalion commander had asked them to rendezvous at the coordinates that he set. The majority of the 69th Battalion had seen how one of the Valkyries was eaten by the giant rock, making their faces turn pale. Although they had fought several monsters in the past, they had never fought a flying monster, let alone one that was a rank 6 sovereign. To make matters worse, there were also giant eagles in the mix, whose number made them retreat as fast as they could without second thoughts. However, just as everyone was thinking that their situation couldn't possibly get any worse, more flying monsters appeared in their vision. "Vultures at 3 o'clock, Piper shouted, informing the other wanderers about the monsters coming from their right side. The Dvalin Federation banned everyone from flying in the sky, having learned the hard way that the flying djinns were very territorial. They would not allow any other flying monsters in their turf unless these monsters were their allies. At that moment, the ally of the rocks and giant eagles, the giant vultures, also came to join the fight, drastically increasing the danger level of the battlefield. Feebnol.C Sigmum. While the night wolves were fast, the flying monsters were even faster. A giant eagle tucked its wings and dove down from the sky like a speeding missile, aiming at one of the Valkyries who was desperately trying to escape. Unfortunately, she was not fast enough. She was easily grabbed by the giant eagle's claws and was whisked away in a heartbeat. "No!" the Valkyrie shouted as she tried to free herself from the claws of the giant eagle. "Let me go! Let me go!" The giant eagle screeched and increased the grip of its claws. The Valkyrie's body was crushed, her bones broken, and she coughed out a mouthful of blood. "How many are they?" Alexis asked Paul, who was running beside him. 50 in total, Paul answered with a grim expression on his face. 1 rank 6 sovereign and 1 rank 5 sovereign. The vultures are rank 4 monsters. "Sir, more monsters are coming from 9 o'clock, one of the wanderers shouted as he pointed to their left side. "Damn!" Al Capone cursed loudly because they were being besieged from all sides. He reported the situation to Zion, who was still hurrying to their location. "Commander, should we scatter and try to escape as individual squads?" Ever since the battle began, he had made sure to stay in contact with their commander to receive his orders in real time. "You don't need to do that," 13 replied. "The djinns can't see you guys properly. At most, they will only see hundreds of night wolves running together. Right now, their only targets are the Valkyries." "Sir, the Valkyries are headed in our direction," Al Capone complained. "Even if they can't see us properly from the sky, once they pursue them, our cover will be blown. Calm down, Al Capone, 13 ordered. Do not break formation, and only run toward the coordinates I gave everyone. Just endure and believe in me. Yes, sir, Al Capone replied. 13 had activated their communicators group feature, so his exchange with Al Capone had been heard by the other members of the 69th Battalion. That feature allowed him to simultaneously give orders to all of his soldiers in real time, giving them equal chances to survive. All of you, stay calm. 13's voice sounded through their communicators. None of you are to break away from the formation. Those who do will certainly die, so travel together as a group. If the monsters shift from targeting the Valkyries to targeting you, you have my permission to engage. However, until that time comes, no one is to attack the flying monsters. Again, only make a move if your lives depended on it. Sir, how about the Valkyries? Al Capone inquired. Just lead them to the coordinates I sent you, 13 stated. If you stop now and engage the monsters, more will come and trap you all in an encirclement. We will have massive casualties on our hands if that happens. So endure and run as fast as you can. Al Capone glanced at the battle in the sky and saw more flying monsters heading in their direction. It seemed that all the flying monsters in the surroundings were being called by the giant rock to gather in order to coordinate an attack on the wanderers who had trespassed in their domain. Viola had already lost 4 of her subordinates despite everyone having done everything they could to evade the attacks from the rock, who seemed to be toying with them. If it wanted, it could have easily killed all of them, but it seemed to find their desperation entertaining, further increasing its appetite. The prettiest girl in the squad could no longer see what was in front of her due to the tears blurring her vision. She was completely dependent on her partner, who had fought countless battles with her in the past. The Pegasus were all flying at their fastest speed, successfully distancing themselves from the giant eagles and the giant vultures. But not from the rock. The moment it attacked, one of their sisters would surely get eaten, and they would once again despair. No, Greta! Viola screamed as one of her close friends was snatched away by the rock, who was picking them off one by one. There had been 12 Valkyries, but they were now down to 7. Viola was starting to regret her decision of giving in to the whims of her subordinates. If they hadn't toyed with the giant eagle earlier and simply eliminated it, the monster wouldn't have had the chance to make its final death cry, which had called out its brethren to avenge it. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets, and the Valkyries who had died wouldn't return to life no matter how much she regretted her decision, one that she would never forget until her last breath. The only thing she could do was hope that a miracle would happen. She and the remaining Valkyries flew low on the ground, following the 69th Battalion, who seemed to be heading to a specific location. Suddenly, they heard a loud horn in the distance, making them look at a Humvee speeding at their location. Al Capone and the other wanderers instinctively felt a lot safer now that their commander had arrived. But with the situation they were in, even they couldn't imagine how Zion would make a difference when there were over 100 flying monsters targeting them from the sky. Shauna's face became pale when she noticed that only 7 Valkyries were flying in the sky. Since she knew that all squads were formed by 12 people, it meant that 5 of them had already died. 13 was currently on top of the Humvee and manning its built-in cannon, but he had no intention of firing at the monsters just yet. Nautilus, use Athena to lock onto my location. 13 spoke to someone using an artifact similar to a walkie-talkie. Prepare all main cannons and raise output to half. Wait for my orders to fire. Understood. The High Orc, Jubii, who was the captain of the Nautilus, replied to 13 through the walkie-talkie. Raising output of the main cannons to half. Currently waiting to connect to Athena. Please stand by for confirmation. 13 narrowed his eyes because this wasn't supposed to be the time that Nautilus would be used. It was one of his trump cards, and it was still not fully operational. Even so, he had no choice but to do it, because if he didn't, the 69th Battalion might all end up dead before they reached the safety of Sector 1. If he had to choose between saving his subordinates or keeping his trump card hidden, he decided to do the former. Nautilus is now connected to Athena. Jubiai's words snapped 13 out of his daze, making the latter give another batch of orders. Colbert, Al Capone, Alexis, Paul, Pietro, Piper, prepare Formation X. After hearing his orders, the Wanderers divided themselves into their respective squads and dismounted from their mounts. They take out their Imperium cannons, but they didn't use it to aim at the flying monsters in the sky. No, they used these cannons to merge with other cannons. Each squad was composed of 5 people, and all of them carried 1 Imperium cannon each. These cannons could be combined together, forming a grand cannon of shorts, which would fire a concentrated beam, which was 10 times more powerful than the regular output of their Imperium cannons. The only downside was that once they used this method, their cannons would deteriorate and eventually be destroyed after shooting 3 times. But desperate times called for desperate situations. In the span of a minute, 60 grand cannons were now operational, and only waiting for 13's orders to attack. The teenage boy was paying close attention to the rock, who was the biggest threat in the battlefield. Right now, its attention was focused on the Valkyries, who had whetted his appetite. Humans were the favorite food of the Jinns, and strong wanderers were a delicacy. This meant that it would not allow the Valkyries to escape and was simply toying with them, just like what they did to its subordinate. Finally, it had decided to attack another Valkyrie, and this time it planned to target Viola, who was the strongest of the group. With a flap of its wings, it made a nosedive from the sky and went for the kill. But when it was only a few meters away from its prey, something bright caught its attention. Before the rock could even identify what it was, a blue beam collided with the side of its body, making it screech in pain as a gaping wound appeared at the point of impact. Blood spilled from the body of the rock, paralyzing it for a brief period of time. A few seconds later, 2 more beams flew in its direction, hitting one of its wings, making it explode. The rock immediately lost its ability to fly and fell from the sky. 69th Battalion, target the giant eagles, and the vultures opened fire. 13 ordered. The grand cannons lit up and fired at their targets, using the lock-on system that 13 had installed in it. It was one of the trump cards of the 69th Battalion that could be used when facing off against rank 5 monsters up to rank 6 monsters. Although it could only be fired 3 times, it packs enough damage to make even these monsters feel a world of pain. Even if it didn't kill them, they would be seriously injured, making them easy pickings later on. Christopher, go and kill the rock, 13 whispered. I will cripple it, so make sure you get the last hit. It is a brute-type monster, so make sure to kill it. The chubby boy nodded and summoned the Blaze skunk avatar to run in its direction. Jubi, target the rock, but make sure not to kill it, 13 said through the walkie-talkie. Christopher is heading towards it to subdue it. Understood, Jubi replied. Not long after, 3 more beams descended from the sky and bombarded the rock, who was already running away from the battlefield, using its clawed feet. The Nautilus main cannons were extremely powerful, but it was still only using half of its maximum output. webnovel.com. The reason for this was that 13 had still not stress-tested because he didn't have enough Imperium back then for any kind of shooting tests. Because of this, he didn't dare to use the maximum output of the submarine's main cannons because it might get destroyed in the process if it gets overheated. Although its attack was not enough to kill the rank 6 monster with a single hit, it was more than enough to give it serious injuries, which would accumulate as it got bombarded by more cannon fire. The only problem was that the main cannons use a lot of Imperium, so the expenditure must be worth it. Since he was certain that the rock was a brute-type monster, he decided that it would be a worthy investment for Christopher, who would gain the avatars of any brute monster, if he was the one who landed the killing blow to end its life. With the grand cannons giving them cover fire, the Valkyries decided to retaliate and engage their enemies in aerial combat. While all of this was happening, Christopher had arrived at the area where the rock had crashed. There he saw Rocky, coiled around a rock's body, who could no longer offer any resistance after it had been hit 6 times by the main cannons of 13 submarine. Christopher then summoned Brutus and ordered it to repeatedly stab the gaping wound on the side of the rock's body, which had been hit by the main cannon. He knew that it would be easier to target the parts that were already damaged, so he decided to focus on targeting those areas. Brutus hacked, stabbed, using the sword that was given to him by Gerald. The rock kept on struggling, but Rocky's hold on him was enough to keep him in place. The Magma Balboa was also a rank 6 sovereign, so it didn't have any problems in subduing the seriously injured rock, whose advantage lay in its ability to fly. After a few minutes of nonstop stabbing, the rock screeched one last time before dying with its eyes wide open. Clearly, it didn't expect that it would die in this manner, filing it with regret at its last moments. Christopher then received a notification, making him do a fist pump. Although the rock's rank had degraded from a rank 6 sovereign to a rank 6 overlord, he was still happy to get a new powerful monster who would allow him to fight in the sky, if the need arose. Piper's eyes widened in shock when she saw the Magma Balboa constrict the rank 6 rock and hold it in place. She had followed Christopher, thinking that he would need assistance in attacking the flying monster that had fallen from the sky. But when she saw this scene, she thought that this was a different monster. After watching for a bit, she noticed that it didn't make any move to attack Christopher, confirming her suspicion that it was the same monster she had met in the Arcadia archipelago. Rocky is here, Piper thought as she glanced at the Magma Balboa, who held the rank 6 sovereign in a deadlock. They were a distance away from the 69th Battalion, who had internally teamed up to form grand cannons to shoot the flying monsters from the sky. They were all too occupied to look in their direction, let alone see what was happening to the leader of the flying monsters they were targeting with grand cannons in the sky. A few minutes later, the rock stopped moving and breathed its last. Christopher, who had dealt the last blow, raised his hand, and a rock materialized beside him. It was smaller than the rank 6 sovereign, but Piper could tell that it was also extremely powerful. Attack the monsters in the sky and don't let them get near our people, Christopher ordered the rock, who responded with a screech of acknowledgement before flying to the sky. Christopher saw Piper looking at him, but he didn't have the time to explain anything to her. He could only press a finger over his lips, telling Piper to keep everything she saw a secret. Christopher recognized that she was one of the wanderers whom Zion had helped in the Arcadia archipelago, so there was a possibility that she recognized Rocky. But it wasn't ideal to mention it now, especially since their situation was nowhere near good at the moment. Rocky then burrowed itself into the ground and headed in 13th's direction. If something unexpected were to happen, he could immediately protect his master and ensure his safety. The moment the rank 6 rock overlord took to the skies, the situation of the battlefield shifted in their favor. It didn't hesitate to attack its former subordinates and rip their wings, making all of them fall from the sky. When the giant vultures and the other flying monsters saw this, all of them made a hasty retreat, for they knew that they didn't stand a chance against the rock. As the monsters started to retreat, the members of the 69th Battalion cheered. However, their happiness was short-lived, cut off by 13th's orders, which sounded on their communicators. All of you evacuate to Sector 1 on the double. 13 ordered. The Dvalin Federation had ordered an immediate evacuation of all personnel on the island. Do not think that we are out of danger yet. If you don't want to die like those Valkyries, pack up and go. Now, don't even bother collecting any cores or monster parts. Just escape while you still can. Having been reminded of the death of the Valkyries who had disobeyed the direct orders of the Dvalin Federation, the soldiers of the 69th Battalion snapped out of their daze and hurriedly summoned their night wolves. They had thought that the battle was over since the rock had died and the flying monsters had retreated, but Zion's words reminded them of the fate of the Valkyries who had ignored their direct orders, which made them feel anxious. Viola and the surviving Valkyries also summoned their night wolves and followed behind the 69th Battalion. Christopher, Colbert, Al Capone, and Piper, who only had blazed skunks as their mounts, were asked by Zion to ride on the Humvee with him. Shauna, who was also seated in the Humvee, wanted to talk to Viola, but the captain of the Valkyries was not in the mood to talk. She was still reeling from the fact that 5 of her subordinates had died. Viola knew that she would be punished when she returned, but she would gladly accept any punishment if it could lessen the grief and guilt she was feeling at that moment. After Al Capone had called him earlier to report what was happening in their location, 13 immediately contacted Benedict, as well as his uncle, Michael, to inform them of the situation. Benedict didn't hesitate to raise the highest alert level on the island and ordered all the officers to evacuate. Michael, who knew that the Dvalin Federation knew more about the situation than they did, ordered his subordinates to evacuate and leave their mining equipment behind. They didn't have the time to carry everything back with them, so they only brought back the Imperium that was already mined for the day. When Marion, the commander of the Valkyries, heard what her subordinates had done, she was inevitably disappointed in them. However, she also thought that Benedict and the members of the Dvalin Federation were overreacting. Since the threat had already been dealt with, why was there a need to evacuate everyone from the island? With that doubt in mind, she went to ask him the reason for doing so. However, the old man didn't hesitate to slap her and pointed his finger on her face. If you can't follow our simple orders, then take your stupid girls with you and leave this place. Benedict roared in anger. If you want to die, then die alone. Don't drag us to hell with your incompetence. In the eyes of others, what they were doing might seem like an overreaction. But to the members of the Dvalin Federation who had suffered countless casualties after many years of trial and error, they knew when to stand their ground and when to evacuate. The one-way teleportation gates that led to the gates were all activated, and those who were on the island didn't hesitate to enter it, allowing them to arrive at the man-made port that was a distance away from the island. The Dvalin Federation had already mobilized dozens of battleships, and they were already on their way to the port. They already readied themselves to provide support fire, just in case their worst fears were to become a reality. The monarch of the Elrod clan, Wendell Elrod, as well as the thrones of the three prestigious families, were riding on the main flagship of their federation. All of them had grim expressions on their faces as they braced themselves for what was about to come. Back on the island, Benedict stood beside the teleporter as he waited for 13th Battalion to arrive. He would need to close the teleporter so that the Djinns wouldn't be able to use them to invade their port, which was strategically located a few miles from the island. When he saw the night wolves in the distance, the old man was finally able to sigh in relief. He made a gesture for them to enter the portal, which they obeyed without asking him any questions. Fortunately, 13 had already made sure that his people would obey his orders without question. The moment Zion's Humvee passed the portal, Benedict pressed the button on his remote control before entering the portal. That button would allow one last person to enter the portal before it closed, shutting it down completely. As if waiting for that moment, rumbling sounds sounded in the distance, as if countless monsters were making their way to Sector 1 in a hurry. Those who were at the port saw black specks of dots beyond the horizon, which seemed to be flying in their direction. Battle stations, Wendell Elrod commanded, and the hidden cannons on the man-made port rose up from their bunkers and revealed themselves. It was then that Marion and Viola finally realized how dangerous the Rigel continent was. The skies were littered with countless flying monsters, and within that mass of chaos was a rank 8 sovereign, whom the only monarch in the Rigel Federation had fought several times in the past. Do you see that? Benedict angrily asked Marion and Viola as he pointed at the monster-infested island. Did you think that we're here to play games with you idiots? Did you come here thinking that you'd be taking a nice, relaxing vacation? Do you finally realize what you have done? All of you only needed to do one thing, and one thing only. Follow the rules we have set. Aren't all of you soldiers? Aren't you supposed to be good when it comes to following orders? Then how come you can't even do that one thing right? Benedict's anger represented the anger that the members of the Dvalin Federation felt at the moment. Due to the emergency evacuation, they were forced to leave some of their important equipment behind. The monsters were bound to destroy everything they had left behind, which meant that their hard work for the past year would all go down the drain. This was a big waste of their efforts in trying to reclaim the Rigel continent. The 69th Battalion couldn't help but feel anxious as they looked in the distance. Perhaps due to their consecutive victories against the Djinns and Magients, they had been complacent and thought that the Rigel continent wasn't as dangerous as they thought. But these naive notions were being broken as they looked at the place where they had been a while ago. Make no mistake, what you are seeing is only a small fraction of the forces that the Djinns have stationed in the Rigel continent. 13, who was standing in front of his soldiers, stated. Take a good, long look, because what you're seeing right now is the same thing that you will see when the gates in the Signy continent open. This is what a Jinn invasion looks like, and a threat that humanity needs to overcome in order to survive in the world. Let me remind you that I brought all of you here to help you prepare mentally for the invasion that will happen in 3 years. 13 scanned the pale faces of his soldiers who had just escaped a near-death situation from only a rank 6 sovereign and dozens of flying monsters. That was nothing compared to the tens of thousands of monsters that were now observing them from the island. A sigh escaped the teenage boy's lips, thinking about how the cannons that his members possessed could no longer be used again, for they had reached their limit after merging them together. The only weapons that his soldiers possessed now were their assault rifles, which were only effective against rank 1 and rank 3 monsters. Of course, the soldiers still have their abilities, and they could use them to fight. At the end of the day, they were still wanderers. They were all summoned to Solterra in order to hone them for the fights against the Jinns and Magians, who were trying to invade their world through the dimensional gates. Everyone, prepare yourselves, 13 stated as he looked at the monster-infested island. Stay together, and make sure to protect our comrades. Do not worry about anyone else. The Valkyries, who specialized in aerial battles, didn't dare to ride their mounts anymore. They feared that the moment they did, it would trigger the flying monsters hovering above the island to attack them. While they wouldn't have to worry about the land-based monsters, the number of flying monsters on the horizon was enough to block the light of the sun. So, this is the true horror of the Rigel continent, Shauna said softly as she held her staff firmly in her hand. She currently stood beside her commander, Marion, and was waiting for her orders. The beautiful lady still had the mark of Benedict's slap on her face. But, right now, she had more important matters to worry about than the bruise that appeared on her cheek. The Battalion Federation and the Jinns had a standoff that lasted for several minutes. Everyone believed that it only needed a small spark, a small trigger to start a war that would dye the sea with the color of blood. Wendell, the monarch of the Elrod clan, was only looking at one place and one place only. At the center of the countless flying monsters, there was a 2-meter-tall birdman who was standing on top of a wyvern. The birdman had bronze feathers covering his entire body. He was also holding a black spear in his hands, and his black eyes locked onto Wendell's body, whom he had almost killed once in the past. If not for the fact that the thrones of the Battalion Federation had been there to rescue him, there would be one less monarch in Pangea right now. A sneer then appeared on the birdman's face as he raised his hand. A moment later, the giant hawk screeched, making all the other flying monsters screech as well. They're coming. Wendell's face turned grim as he summoned his mythical weapon, a blue trident. The 3 thrones also summoned their weapons, intending to fight the rank 8 sovereign together with Wendell. He was the strongest wanderer in the Battalion Federation, and they would not allow him to die no matter what. Steady, 13 said as all his soldiers took out their assault rifles and aimed at the approaching monsters. In the background, the cannons of the man-made port, as well as the cannons of the battleships, all roared to life. Some of the monsters were obliterated by the cannon shots, but other monsters swiftly took their place. A wave of unending monsters descended upon the man-made island, with the intention to annihilate all the wanderers who had decided to make their stand against them. Open fire, 13 ordered, and his soldiers unleashed a deadly barrage, decimating the monsters that targeted the Valkyries beside their defensive formation. They already know that their military armor made the Jinns and Magians ignore their presence, which they took to their advantage. However, now that they were actively attacking, the monsters finally took notice of their presence and also attacked them en masse. The Blaze Skunks, who were guarding their masters, unleashed their blazing acid sprays, forcing the monster targeting the 69th Battalion to momentarily back away. 13 didn't know if he would be able to preserve all of his members in this battle, but he still decided to give it a try. Jubii, provide cover fire, 13 ordered. Yes, master, Jubii replied. Miles away from the battlefield, a submarine rose up on the surface of the sea. Its main cannons then moved to aim at the monsters that were now targeting the 69th Battalion. A barrage was soon unleashed, decimating those it hit in an instant. Although there was a risk of Nautilus being discovered, 13 didn't have the leisure to hold back his punches. "Tiona, we will also attack," 13 stated, making the black snake coiled on his neck nod her head. 13 summoned a black bow in his hand as Tiona crawled onto his right arm. She then made her body as hard as adamantium and allowed her master to use her as an arrow to his bow. After aiming at the rank 4 monster that was flying towards Shauna, 13 released the string of her bow, allowing Tiona to pierce the head of the monster, who died not knowing how it died. The battle that would soon be known as the Battle of the Valkyries started in full swing. Explosions reverberated across the battlefield as cannons and manifestations of abilities clashed with each other. If the 69th Battalion and the Valkyries had initially thought that the Rigel continent wasn't as dangerous as they expected, that was only because they had yet to experience a monster invasion during their stay. Now, they finally realized how wrong they were. The only reason why they hadn't been met with a full frontal assault by the Jinns was credited to the fact that the Dvalin Federation had painstakingly learned the boundaries of what they could do and what they couldn't do with the limited manpower they had. The no-flying ban had come from a bitter pill that they swallowed in the past. Ever since that incident, they made sure to reiterate this rule whenever there was an outside faction or organization that planned to enter the Rigel continent. Unfortunately, this rule had not been taken seriously by the Valkyries, who were part of Viola's squad. Now, they were seeing firsthand the consequences of their actions. Marion, who was also a champion, fought as fiercely as she could, treating it as a way to atone for the mistake of her subordinates. The Valkyries also knew that this incident was their fault, so just like their commander, they went all out and attacked with everything they had. Wendell, the monarch of the Elrod clan, roared as he swung his trident forward. The seawater rose up and unleashed countless water spears at the flying monsters who were attacking the port. The ability he gained was the ability to manipulate water and the sea. This was why the port was constructed a few miles away from the island. In the worst-case scenario, he would be able to fight and defend it with his abilities. Even so, it wasn't easy. It was as if all the flying monsters in the Rigel continent had gathered to end all of them. No matter how hard the defenders tried to fight back, the casualties were steadily rising, making everyone's faces turn grim. But compared to the time when they first experienced this kind of assault from the Birdman, they were lasting much longer than they originally expected. The battleships of the Leventis family, as well as the central government, were made to fight against Jinns and Magians. Because of this, their cover fire decimated countless Jinns and Magians, giving their people at the port a bit of breathing space. Even so, screams of horror and death spread in the surroundings as the flying monsters claimed their prey, dyeing the sea in the color of blood. Suddenly, Wendell jumped forward and summoned a flying manta ray. The thrones of the 3 prestigious families swiftly followed since the rank 8 sovereign had finally made his move. If they allowed it to descend on the island, almost everyone there would die, so they needed to block his attacks with everything they had. 13, who saw this from the side, frowned and gave an order to Jubii, who was currently on the Nautilus. "Allow manual connection," 13 ordered. "Manual connection activated," Jubii replied. 13 lowered the visor of his military armor and took control of the main cannons of Nautilus. He was the only one who could pull off making quick calculations in real time, allowing him to aim the cannons wherever he wished for them to attack. "Christopher, Colbert, protect me," 13 ordered. The 2 captains didn't hesitate and moved beside their commander and stood beside him. Christopher only summoned Brutus. He was afraid that if he summoned his newly acquired rock, the Dvalin Federation would mistake it for an enemy and kill it without mercy. Suddenly, 2 harpies descended from the sky and attacked the teenage boy from his right side. However, before they could even come close, a black chakram sliced off their heads without mercy before flying towards 13. A moment later, the chakram transformed into a black snake, who immediately coiled around her master's neck. Tiona eyed the monsters who were aiming for her master's life, ready to strike if they came within her striking range. Increase the output of main cannons to 80%. 13 ordered. Cannon output increased to 80%, Jubai replied. 13 knew that this was the highest output that he could use at the moment, because this was Nautilus' first battle run. If the main cannons overheated, he wouldn't be able to use it for a while, which would be bad for their current situation. The Birdman is too fast and too small, 13 thought. I need to time this perfectly. In theory, the rank 8 Sovereign and the Monarch were of the same rank, so they should be able to fight each other head-on. However, 13 didn't like to take chances, especially since the 3 thrones were also protecting Wendell. The key to this battle was the downfall of one side's powerhouse. If Wendell lost, then everyone would die. 13's goal was to at least injure the Birdman, giving the Monarch an edge in their battle. As the teenage boy waited for the right opportunity, dozens of Wanderers were dying by the minute. Several members of the 69th Battalion were also injured during the battle, but fortunately, they didn't have any casualties yet. 13 had ordered them to summon their night wolves and hide under their bodies, while they used their assault rifles to attack. The night wolves were rank 4 alpha monsters, so they weren't easy to defeat. They also helped their masters kill those who were attacking them, but the disparity in number was simply too much. It was like a giant mantis fighting against 100 ants. Even if it was bigger and stronger, it was still being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. As absolute pandemonium took place around them, the Birdman and the Monarch clashed several times in the air, with the thrones protecting Wendell from the attacks of the Birdman's subordinates. Despite the efforts of the 4 strongest men in the Valiant Federation, their armor was bloody with the blood of not only their enemies, but also their own. The Birdman, who was getting annoyed, decided to target one of the thrones so that Wendell would have one less protector. It had timed its attack perfectly, doing a feint, which Wendell thought was an attack on his right side. But instead of attacking him, the Birdman flew past him and aimed its spear at Hugo Riggs' chest. Hugo, who had just killed 2 rank 5 monsters, didn't have enough time to defend himself from the Sovereign's attack. Just as Wendell and the 2 other thrones were about to come to his rescue, a blue beam of light streaked across the sky and hit the side of the Birdman's body, making it stagger midair. Wallace, who was already in mid-swing of his trident, went for the kill, but the Birdman flipped its body at the last second and evaded his attack. Using its clawed feet, the Birdman used the Monarch's body as a platform and kicked him away, allowing it to escape Ronald Rhodes and Spencer Nightshade's follow-up attacks, which targeted its wings. The Birdman sneered, thinking that the humans had lost their only opportunity to deal him the killing blow. But before it could truly feel good about escaping unscathed from a near-death experience, 3 beams of light collided with its right wing, shaving it off completely. The Birdman cried out in pain before falling from the sky. Wendell's eyes turned bloodshot as he unleashed a giant water spear to pierce through the falling Birdman's body. However, the rank 8 Sovereign didn't plan to die so easily. After throwing its own spear to block the water spear's strike, it used the resulting momentum to propel itself toward the port so that it would be able to land safely on it. No, Wendell's scream spread on the battlefield. The port was the last place where he wanted his enemy to go. He could already envision that everyone on it would be annihilated. Even he couldn't defeat the monster, let alone the ones who were left in the port. The Birdman landed, skidding several meters as its clawed feet gripped the metallic ground, sending sparks flying as his speed decreased. It was injured, but the injury was not bad enough to prevent it from fighting. When it came to a complete stop, it immediately turned around to kill the first human within its reach. Unlike most djinns and magents, the Birdman didn't have any color blindness. This was why when it saw a teenage boy wearing a green military uniform standing only a few meters away from it, it didn't hesitate to reach out to him and crush his head into a pulp. "Hi," 13 said as the rank 8 Sovereign's hand was about to reach him. "Bye." Before the rank 8 Sovereign could even process 13's words, the monster was bathed in a purple light before it was sucked up inside a purple sphere. The purple sphere shook once as the Birdman attempted to free itself from the teenage boy's attempt to capture it. Just as it was thinking of ripping the annoying human to shreds, it found itself staring at a being that made its entire body stiffen. Oh! Metatron glanced at the Birdman, who suddenly appeared inside his treasury out of nowhere. It seems that the good luck charm I gave 13 before he returned to Pangea proved to be useful. Well then, why don't you sit down so we can discuss the meaning of life? What? You don't want to? Fine. I was just planning to have roasted bird for lunch. Huh? You now want to talk about the meaning of life? Good. Now sit properly. Here are some cookies and milk. The two of us are going to have a lot to talk about. The sudden disappearance of the Birdman caught the monsters, as well as the Wanderers, by surprise. However, less than a minute later, the two sides once again clashed in a royal rumble. But things were different this time. Without the presence of their leader to give them orders and boost their morale, the Wanderers were able to gain momentum. 13, whose nose was bleeding and was barely able to stand, handed the control of the Nautilus back to Jubii and ordered him to help the Dvalin Federation obliterate the monster army. Shauna, who had seen everything that had happened, rushed to 13's side and supported his body. Using her ability, she started to heal his injuries. However, 13, who had used a lot of computing power to effectively trap the Rank 8 Sovereign, endured to keep himself conscious. The battle was still not over, and he needed to give commands to his subordinates to ensure that none of them would die. JKSDK, JDSK, JKL, JLS. 13 tried to speak, but the words that came out of his mouth were only gibberish. This made Shauna more concerned about him. It seemed that her healing power was not working properly on the boy. Although his injuries were healing, the Saintess could tell that only a fifth of her power was working on him, which she found surprising. Even so, she didn't let him go and even pulled him closer to her, whispering words of assurance in his ears. "Don't worry. We will be fine," Shauna said softly. "We're going to be fine." 13, who had given up on talking, decided to use hand signals to order his troops. Fortunately, he had also trained them with hand signals. With his hand, he ordered them to continue attacking the monsters and not worry about him. Christopher and Colbert, whom 13 had asked to back away because he didn't want them to be involved in a showdown with the Rank 8 Sovereign, returned to his side. Although he was confident that the purple sphere that Metatron gifted him would work, he didn't want his two loyal subordinates to get hurt just in case his plan didn't work the way he intended to. Jubii, who knew that 13 was in a vulnerable state, focused on attacking the monsters that were near his location at the port. With the powerful cannons of Nautilus, countless monsters were annihilated with a single beam of light, which was using a ton worth of Imperium with every shot. It was a very costly barrage, but life was priceless. So 13 gave Jubii the authority to use as much Imperium as needed to secure victory. An hour later, the flying monsters had enough and retreated back to the island. Wendell, whose left arm was broken and had countless wounds on his body, raised his trident high in the air and roared a victorious roar. The members of the Dvalin Federation and the rest of the survivors also cheered, for the battle was finally over. Although hundreds of Wanderers died, this was the first time that the Dvalin Federation managed to win against the Rank 8 Sovereign and its subordinates, who controlled the northern edge of the Rigel continent. Marion and Viola, whose vision was blurred by tears, looked at the dead bodies of their sisters, who would no longer open their eyes again. The number of Valkyries that died in the battle was over 300. On the other hand, the Dvalin Federation suffered over 1,000 deaths. The number of Jinns that died was higher, but no one cared about that part. Although dozens of soldiers belonging to the 69th Battalion suffered very serious injuries, none of them died. Those who were on the brink of dying were immediately helped by Shauna, giving them a new lease on life. Knowing that there was still a possibility that the flying monsters would once again attack the port, all the battleships of the Dvalin Federation stood in battle formation. The fleet of the Leventis family, as well as the battleships of the Valkyries, took the injured back to the main headquarters of the Dvalin Federation to receive treatment. 13, who was certain that his troops would finally be treated properly, finally stopped enduring and lost consciousness inside the infirmary of the Leventis aircraft carrier. A day later, news of the battle in the Rigel continent reached the central government. The monarch clans, and the prestigious families. All of them were shocked by how things escalated to that point. But the one hit the hardest was the central government, whose members triggered this calamity in the first place. Knowing that words wouldn't be enough to handle the aftermath, the Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal of the central government made their way to the Battalion Federation. But they weren't alone. They brought the 50th up to the 59th Battalion with them, ready to protect the Battalion Federation during their time of adversity. Arthur, who had received 13's message before he passed out, immediately called for an emergency family meeting. 13 had asked him to go to the Rigel continent, which meant that there was an opportunity for their family to gain profits. Arthur no longer questioned his no-good grandson's judgment, especially after everything he had seen and experienced. But it wasn't only the Leventis family who started to move. The Remington clan, the Smith family, and the Lockwood family, who also belonged to the prestigious families, noticed that Arthur's main fleet was starting to gather food supplies, weaponry, as well as necessary resources for a large-scale battle. They were well aware of the Imperium and Palladium mines that were discovered in the Rigel continent. So at first, they assumed that Arthur was going there to help his grandson get more resources for their family. But after hearing the news of what happened in the Rigel continent, these three families felt that a change was about to happen to the world. Because of it, they also made preparations to head to the Battalion Federation, bringing their powerhouses with them. They didn't know what they were going to find in the Rigel continent. But one thing was clear: years of what seemed to be futile struggles finally bore fruit. Curiosity, interest, and obsession, mile markers on the road to damnation. 2 days after the battle ended, 13 finally opened his eyes. He hadn't suffered any serious injuries and only mentally exhausted himself after on-the-spot calculating the Birdman's flight patterns and possible moves it would make after being hit by Nautilus main cannons. 13 had even estimated where the Birdman would land and positioned himself in that location, making sure that the first wanderer whom the rank 8 sovereign would interact with was him. Since the battle ended, there had been no further invasions at the port. The engineers of the Battalion Federation were still busy with the repair of the artillery guns and cannons that had been destroyed during the battle. The dead had also been sent back to the Battalion main headquarters, where a grand funeral would be hosted the day after tomorrow. The Valkyries who had died were also included in that ceremony. Marion spent the past 2 days writing letters to the families of her dead soldiers. Viola had locked herself up inside her room, refusing to come out. She had been blaming herself not only for the death of her subordinates, but also for the death of her other sisters. Since the founding of the Valkyries division, this was the first time they had suffered so many losses. Everyone, including the Saintess, couldn't help but feel down about it. After getting off from the bed in the infirmary, 13 was immediately greeted by a worried Tiona. She repeatedly nudged his cheek as if telling him to continue resting so that he would recover faster. "I'm fine, Tiona," 13 said to reassure the black snake, who had been coiled up on his chest and looking after him since he had lost consciousness. When the teenage boy left his private room, the physician in charge immediately asked if he was feeling any pain anywhere. "I'm feeling fine, doctor," 13 replied. "I need to see my uncle and discuss a few things with him. I'll come back after I'm done talking with my uncle, so you could do a quick checkup later." "Understood, sir," the doctor nodded. After leaving the infirmary, 13 bumped into Christopher and Colbert, who were also on their way to see him. Seeing that their young master was now awake and seemed to be doing better, the two of them finally breathed a sigh of relief. "Come with me," 13 ordered. "I need to talk to the two of you later. But wait for now, since I need to see my uncle first." Christopher and Colbert nodded and followed behind 13. When they reached the command center, they saw a few people, whom the three didn't expect to find in their ship. "You're awake?" Benedict asked with a smile. "No, sir. I'm not awake," 13 replied. "You must be having a visual hallucination." "You damn brat," Benedict smirked as he walked toward the teenage boy while showing his fist. "Do you want me to smack you that badly?" "Uncle, I'm still injured." 13 immediately acted like a sick patient, making the old man click his tongue in annoyance. 13 then shifted his gaze to the commander of the Valkyries, Marion, whose aura had dimmed considerably since he last saw her. She looked very sad and was obviously still affected by what happened a few days ago. "Hey, little guy," Marion greeted. "I'm glad you're already awake. I thought you'd be sleeping for a week." "Commander Marion," 13 saluted. "Thank you, I am well." Marion smiled and saluted the teenage boy back. Truth be told, she was contemplating whether she should resign from her position due to the incident that transpired not long ago. Although it was Viola's fault for letting her subordinates break the no-flying ban, it still reflected badly on her as their superior. 13, who seemed to know what the commander was thinking, sighed in his heart. However, this was something outside of his control. In the end, he chose not to say any empty words of consolation to cheer the beautiful woman, who had been crying on her own inside her room since a day ago. "Uncle, can you tell me the current situation right now?" 13 asked Benedict, who was also feeling depressed after the major losses they suffered during the battle. "No attacks followed since the battle ended," Benedict answered. "The entire fleet of the Battalion Federation is now guarding the port, which is currently under repair." The old man paused briefly before glancing at Marion, who had been berated intensively by the higher-ups of the Battalion Federation. If not for the fact that they had managed to emerge victorious in the battle, it was highly likely that the monarch of the Elrod clan, as well as the thrones of the three prestigious families, would have already executed Viola for her crime of breaking their rules. "In 2 days, we are going to hold a memorial service for those who had died in battle," Benedict continued his explanation. "The Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal will be arriving later this afternoon by plane, accompanied by some of their officers. It's a good thing that you woke up on time, since we want you to take part in the meeting tonight." After hearing everything that the old man had to say, 13 spoke out. His words made Michael, Marion, and Benedict look at him with solemn expressions on their faces. "Since the Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal are coming, it will be best that we discuss a grand assault on the northern regions of the Rigel continent," 13 stated. "Right now, one of the pillars of the Jinns is out of the picture. With the greatest threat finally gone, we can take this opportunity to liberate more lands." "Zion, that's a bold statement," Benedict commented. "Do you really think that the Battalion Federation is ready to fight after losing so many wanderers?" "It's because of this reason that the Battalion Federation should advance," 13 answered. "I don't want to sound like I don't understand what you're going through, but there is no better time than this moment to push forward. The Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal will be arriving, and I'm sure their main reason for coming here is to compensate the Battalion Federation for their losses." 13 briefly glanced at Marion, who lowered her head because she was still blaming herself for this incident. The Rigel continent is under the control of 8 rank 8 sovereigns and 3 rank 9 sovereigns. Their territories are divided equally among each other, with the 3 rank 9 sovereigns guarding the central regions of the continent, where their main dimensional gate is located. Those 3 rank 9 sovereigns are 3 Earth Dragons, referred to as the 3 mobile strongholds. They're not only very slow, but they also can't fly, so their role is to guard the dimensional gate and prevent anyone from destroying it. Now that one of the 8 rank 8 sovereigns is out of the picture, there is now a hole in their defenses, which we could exploit. Benedict crossed his arms over his chest and looked at the teenage boy, who was thinking of a very bold plan. Truth be told, the higher-ups of the Battalion Federation were also thinking about executing a massive counterattack. Just as 13 said, it was best to make a move now that the sovereign who stood guard over the northern regions of the Rigel continent was gone. There was no better time than now to secure a firm foothold, allowing them to give hope to everyone, including those who were in the Signy continent. If they were to succeed, the Wanderers would feel like they had the power to repel the invaders who thought that they could move unhindered in their world. While the general consensus of the higher-ups of the Battalion Federation was to recall all their forces who were currently in the Sirius continent, Aldebaran continent, and the Signy continent to execute a grand counterattack, this was something only they knew. Because of this, he wanted to ask the teenage boy why he believed that now was the perfect time to strike back at the Jinns, who had just decimated 1/10 of their overall fighting force a few days ago. "Let's say that we do what you had just suggested," Benedict said. "After that, what is stopping them from reclaiming the lands we hypothetically conquer? They can easily do that. you know? Then tell me, what is stopping 2 monarchs and 5 thrones from destroying the territories that they left unguarded? 13 asked back. Don't tell me. Benedict's eyes widened in shock as he looked at the boy, who was currently wearing a devilish smile on his face. Uncle, the time has changed, 13 replied. When the Jinns and Magians invaded the Rigel continent, the Wanderers were still weak. There were only 6 monarchs, a few thrones, and less than 100 champions. The technology to combat Jinns and Magians at that time was also not as developed as what we have right now. Granted, we can't fully liberate the Rigel continent, but we can certainly push them back and secure a stronghold on the northern region of the continent. Benedict smirked before asking the boy the question that really mattered. Earlier, you mentioned that the 3 rank 9 sovereigns are protecting the dimensional gate at the center of the continent, Benedict stated. Then, what if one of them goes to the north to deal with us? We have killed one of the 8 rank 8 sovereigns, but there are 7 more. What if they all teamed up against us, alongside one of the rank 9 sovereigns? Even if the Grand Marshal, the Field Marshal, and your grandfather join us in this expedition, I doubt that we'll be able to beat the Jinn's elite forces. 13 only smirked and raised a finger. I'll tell you how we can win once everyone is gathered for the meeting tonight, Uncle. It will be easier if I just say it at once. Benedict was amused by 13's words, but in the end, he decided that it would indeed be better if everyone were present to hear what he was going to say. They also planned to question him about what happened to the rank 8 sovereign who suddenly disappeared from the battlefield. It was only because of that incident that they managed to deliver a devastating blow to their enemies, who by then had destroyed all the structures in the 12 sectors they had been forced to abandon. After his chat with Benedict, 13 went to talk to Michael, who had been silently listening to their discussion. Just like Benedict, he had a lot of things he wanted to ask his nephew. But since there were other people around, he decided to only talk about the things that would not pose any problem, even when overheard by others. Your grandpa will be arriving this afternoon by plane as well, Michael said. But he won't be coming alone, Michael said. Trevor Remington, Morris Smith, and Stephen Lockwood are also coming with him. 13 smirked. He had long felt that if his grandpa were to make a move, the rest of those who rule the Aldebaran continent would move as well. Can Leventis engineers repair the handheld cannons of my troops? 13 inquired. Yes, but it will take them at least 2 weeks to repair them all, Michael answered. There is also the issue with the damage to the Imperium mine. Fortunately, we brought replacements with us for both the handheld cannons and the mine equipment. 13 nodded. True, but we will need all the help we can get. Ask the engineers to focus on the handheld cannons first. Don't worry about the mining equipment. The Dvalin Federation will handle the rest. Understood, Michael replied. But, Zion, will this counterattack really work? Michael had doubts about whether it was really possible to secure the northern regions of the Rigel continent. We will, 13 replied with confidence. But only if one condition is met. And that is? Michael asked with genuine curiosity. Benedict, Marion, Christopher, and Colbert also perked their ears, wanting to hear what 13 was about to say. This counterattack will only succeed if I become the supreme commander of this operation, 13 declared. Otherwise, it won't work. Michael fixed the glasses on his face, but he didn't deny his good nephew's claim. The boy had successfully orchestrated the battle in the Valbera and Arcadia archipelago, and only idiots would downplay such an achievement. And what if they don't want to listen to you? Michael asked half a minute later. I don't care if they don't listen to me, 13 replied casually. As long as the Leventis family listens, I'm sure I can work something out. Michael and 13 smiled at each other and chuckled at the same time. The laughter of the two gave Benedict goosebumps, but something inside of him was telling him that whatever the boy planned to do, he should jump on his bandwagon to gain some benefits. Marion, who thought that there was nothing for her to do here, decided to leave the room. She still hadn't finished writing letters to the families of the deceased members of her battalion. When he was certain that the commander of the Valkyries had truly left the room, the teenage boy looked at Benedict with a solemn expression on his face. Don't be too hard on them, 13 said. Although they were the ones who were truly at fault, The Dvalin Federation wouldn't have an opportunity to defeat the King of the North if the incident didn't happen. Did we really defeat it? Benedict pursed his lips. Last time we saw the Birdman, he was bathed in a purple light and disappeared completely. You still haven't told me what happened to it. 13 smiled. Let's just say that you won't have to worry about the Birdman ever again. Can you guarantee that? Benedict arched an eyebrow. Yes, 13 replied. Seeing the teenage boy's confident expression, Benedict finally relaxed. This was one of the major concerns that their organization was currently facing. They feared that the Birdman would return and jeopardize their future operations. Michael then excused himself and his nephew. Then they left the room together with Christopher. Colbert, who was about to follow behind them, suddenly felt a palm lightly tap on his shoulder. Benedict gave him a knowing smile, which Colbert returned before nodding his head. After that short exchange, the teenage boy hurriedly caught up to his commander, who was about to have a private talk with Michael. The teenage boy was currently the Riggs family agent, tasked to divulge any important information to them as soon as he caught wind of it. Of course, they didn't know that 13 was making use of Colbert as a double agent, fooling the Riggs family into thinking that they were monitoring the 69th Battalion, as well as Zion's movements effectively. Information warfare was one of 13's specialties, and there was no one in Pangea who could beat him when it came to working with cannon fodders, who had an instinctual affinity of being loyal only to him. Later that afternoon, several of the most influential people in Pangea arrived at the Dvalin Federation by plane. Some of the high-ranking officers whom the Federation had stationed in Signy, Sirius, and Aldebaran continents also made their way back to their headquarters to participate in a grand meeting of sorts. With so many big shots arriving one by one, the security of the island fortress was raised to its highest level. Among the ones who arrived were none other than Arthur, accompanied by the Leventis family guards who had participated in the battle in the Arcadia archipelago. There was an unexpected individual who came with them. That person was none other than Hans, whom 13 was surprised to see. My lady is very worried about your safety, so she asked me to come and protect you. Hans bowed respectfully to the teenage boy. And I'm sure that you will work these old bones of mine until they break. I'll do my best to keep you alive, young master, even if I have to sacrifice my life for it. No one's sacrificing any life, Hans, 13 said with a smile. I still need you to work for me for many years to come. You ain't kicking the bucket until I give you the permission to kick the bucket. The old butler smiled faintly and nodded his head. Your wish is my command, young master. Hans came to the Dvalin Federation under the order of Lady Callista. Even Arthur didn't have the authority to order him around, for he would only listen to Zion as per her lady's command. Arthur knew this as well, so he didn't make any comments. He simply rested his hand on his grandson's shoulder, giving it a firm grip. Slam dunk, Arthur asked. Slam dunk, 13 replied. The two then exchanged knowing smiles with each other after speaking in code words. Zion's answer just now meant that the Leventis family was bound to profit greatly from this expedition, which was the only thing that Arthur needed to hear. The bulk of their naval forces would be arriving in a week. Arthur was supposed to travel with them, but Zion asked him to come in advance, so he went ahead. The plane of the Remington clan landed at the airport right after the Leventis plane landed. 13 watched as the monarch of the Remington clan, Trevor Remington, descended from the plane, followed closely by the patriarchs of the Smith and Lockwood families. Morris Smith and Stephen Lockwood decided to come along, which meant that all the monarchs and thrones of the Aldebaran continent were currently in the Dvalin Federation's main headquarters. You should have just come with us, Arthur, Trevor said with a smile. My plane is big enough to fit all of us. No, thank you, Arthur replied. Morris likes to fart, and Stephen has an athlete's foot. I'm surprised that you managed to survive that flight with these two stinky fools by your side. Shut up, you old fart, Morris commented with a smile. Your old age has made you senile. What's the problem? You can no longer get it up to satisfy your beautiful wife. Don't be like that. Morris, Stephen, who had been accused of having an athlete's foot earlier, chuckled. Arthur is already old. Be understanding. Who knows? He might kick the bucket one of these days. Trevor chuckled after hearing the usual banter between the heads of the three prestigious families of the Aldebaran continent. All of them had known each other for years. Although they didn't get along, they also didn't go out of their way to antagonize each other. They only exchanged barbed words whenever they met, but that was it. In the end, their relationship had kept the Aldebaran continent peaceful for many decades. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time, Zion. Trevor gave the boy a curt nod. I'm a big fan of yours. One of these days, the two of us should have lunch or dinner together. I'd love to hear you share the stories of your adventures in Solterra. Also, I have many beautiful granddaughters who are of the same age as you. I'll make sure to invite you when we celebrate something in the Remington residence. I'd be happy to accept such an invitation, Sir Trevor, 13 replied. Out of all the monarchs, 13 didn't hate Trevor Remington as much. When Aaron had killed his previous host, the man before him had attempted to heal the latter's wound. However, Aaron Ashford stood in his way and threatened him, preventing the only healer among the monarchs from doing anything. Guests, it will be best if all of you come inside, Wendell, the monarch of the Elrod clan, said to everyone. Come, we have refreshments waiting for all of you. The Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal are already waiting in the Grand Hall. Good. Trevor smiled as he shook hands with Wendell. Lead the way. Limousines arrived at the airport and drove their VIP guests to the Tower of Dvalin. This was the place where all important talks were held, serving as a five-star hotel for important guests who visit the main headquarters of the Federation. Shortly after the plane of the Remington clan left the main runway, another plane descended. This time, it carried the other high-ranking officers of the Federation, who had come from the Signy continent. Inside the plane was the Grand Strategist of the Dvalin Federation, who was supposed to command their soldiers who had already been stationed in the Signy continent in preparation for the first wave of the invasion that would happen in a few months. Welcome back, sir. One of the staff saluted a tall man with gray hair and blue eyes as soon as he disembarked from the plane. The Patriarch is already expecting you. Take me to him, the gray-haired man replied. He was none other than Renz Elrod, the younger brother of Wendell and the one acting as the second-in-command of the Elrod clan. He was hailed as a genius when it came to strategies. Through his effort, the Dvalin Federation had avoided calamities which would have destroyed their foundation completely. Since a grand counterattack was planned to be executed soon, Wendell decided to call his brother back and ask for his help in their upcoming counterattack. When Renz arrived at the Tower of Dvalin, he headed straight to the highest floor, where the guests were currently enjoying a fancy meal made by the best chefs in the Federation. Only the monarchs and thrones, along with the important members of their families, stayed on the top floor. Their guards and subordinates were directed somewhere else to eat and rest after their long journey. You're finally here, brother, Wendell said as he walked up to his brother with a smile. I came, but you weren't there to receive me. Renz snorted. Wendell patted his brother's shoulder because he knew that he was at fault for not being there when he arrived at the airport. Yeah, my bad, Wendell commented. It won't happen again. It better not, Renz replied before walking toward one of the tables and making a gesture for a waiter to serve him. 13 observed the sharp-eyed strategist of the Dvalin Federation and smirked. It seems that this guy is a villain, 13 thought. Good, I can use this guy. Renz felt someone staring at him, so he raised his head to look in 13's direction. The teenage boy didn't avert his gaze and simply gave the strategist a curt nod, which made the latter narrow his eyes. The two stared at each other for nearly a minute before 13 broke the connection first. With that simple interaction, the teenage boy could tell that Renz was someone who didn't like to lose. He decided to take a step back for now and let the other party have the win in a shallow staring contest. 13 had always been someone who saw things in the bigger picture, and he had no time for petty things. Just as expected, Renz scoffed, thinking that the teenage boy was intimidated by his stare. He wasn't aware that the boy, whom he thought he intimidated, was laughing inside his heart and thinking of the many ways he could break his second villain. The mere thought of it made the teenage boy look forward to it more. Arthur and the rest of the important people noticed this exchange between the two people whom they believed would play an important role in their upcoming counterattack. They didn't miss Zion backing down first, and the majority of them smiled in the belief that Zion was intimidated. After all, in their point of view, he was just a child. However, Arthur, Michael, and Hans were already pitying Renz, knowing that he was about to face the second black sheep of the Leventis family. 2 hours after everyone had eaten and drank to their fill, they all gathered around the round table, where they conducted their conference. All the people who weren't meant to be part of the discussion had already left, including the waiters who had served them earlier. "I'm sure that all of you have heard of the incident that happened a few days ago," Wendell stated. "But you might not know the specifics, so I will tell you the full extent of the battle to the best of my abilities." The monarch then narrated how things started and how things ended. He didn't hold back in saying that the Dvalin Federation had lost more than 1,000 lives due to the insubordination of the Valkyries, who broke their no-flying ban. The Grand Marshal and Field Marshal of the central government didn't make any comments from start to finish. They already received reports of what had happened, so they understood that no matter how hard they sugarcoated the situation, the fault lay on their side of the playing field. However, I will also not downplay the courage and bravery that the Valkyries had displayed during the battle, Wendell stated. I will also not deny the fact that if this incident hadn't happened, we wouldn't have the chance to win against the forces of the King of the North, which for some reason disappeared in the middle of the battle. Zion, it's your turn to tell us what happened back there. I didn't ask you about it earlier because you were unconscious for 2 days and Riggs informed me that you wanted to explain it once everyone was gathered. Your condition has been met. So do tell us what happened back then. If not for you, the victory that we achieved would not have been possible. 13 nodded and stood up from his seat. All eyes focused on his body, but the teenage boy didn't seem to feel any anxiety after being stared at by so many powerful people at the same time. All of you must be aware of the restrictions that the One has placed upon my body, 13 started. Perhaps knowing that my restriction is a bit unfair, he gave me a purple sphere that could save my life once. That purple sphere can trap anyone up to a rank 8 sovereign and send them to a place where they would never be seen from again. Unfortunately, I only have one such item, and it's so far the only one not restricted by my item ban. In the end, it did save my life, which is a good trade-off for a one-time use item. I assure everyone that you will no longer have to worry about that, Birdman, ever again. After 13 finished his explanation, the people in the room looked at him with conflicted looks on their faces. This was especially true for Wendell and the Thrones, who belonged to the prestigious families of the Dvalin Federation. "I have a question." Ren spoke up as he gazed at the teenage boy with a sharp gaze. "Did the One only give you that one life-saving item, or did he give you more?" "That's the only item he had given to me," 13 replied calmly. "So, does that mean that you no longer have any value in this upcoming counterattack?" Renz asked in a teasing tone. "You can no longer perform any miracle that can ensure our victory." "Value?" 13 chuckled. "All I can say is that unless I become the Grand Commander of the counterattack, any attempt that any of you make is bound to fail." "Oh," Renz arched an eyebrow. "I wonder where that confidence of yours is coming from. Tell me, have you defeated a Magian prince?" 13 also arched an eyebrow. "No," Renz answered. "But you can't prove that you were really the one that defeated the Magian prince, can you? I'm sure that the tale of your grand expedition has been exaggerated a little." 13 smirked. "Then, can you tell me any of your grand achievements?" "Well, for one thing, the Dvalin Federation still stands because of me." Renz crossed his leg over the other as he stared at the boy. "I also did a few things like..." One by one, Renz stated his achievements, which had been verified by everyone in the room. After he finished talking, everyone's gazes once again landed on the teenage boy, who was in the middle of yawning. "Oh, you're finally done?" 13 asked. "I almost fell asleep about your useless achievements." "Useless?" Renz frowned. "Yes, very useless achievements," 13 replied. "You spent many years wasting your time creating strategies that slowly diminished the manpower of the Dvalin Federation. You spent years of futile struggle, and what did you achieve in those years? 12 square kilometers of land. Those 12 sectors that you readily abandon whenever the rank 8 sovereign appears to drive you out. You're like little mice that run away whenever the big cat comes to play. I'm sure that you and the rest of the Battalion Federation also understood that what you are doing is just a futile struggle. The expressions of Wendell, as well as the thrones of the Battalion Federation, started to change to anger, which prompted the Grand Marshal of the central government to stand behind the boy and protect him just in case they got carried away. However, Lawrence was also cursing the boy for saying things that were very provocative. But before things escalated even further, 13 smiled and raised one finger. "I have surpassed all that achievement of yours within a mere one day," 13 stated. "So please, don't even compare your useless achievements to what I have done. Even if we don't talk about the things I accomplished in Solterra, the fact remains that I dealt with the King of the North, which you and the entirety of the Battalion Federation failed to defeat for many years." 13 then casually raised his glass filled with fruit juice as if proposing a toast. "I know that you're thinking that if you had the same purple sphere that I do, you would have also dealt with the rank 8 sovereign yourself," 13 added. "So, how about we have a competition?" "A competition?" Renz's expression was as cold as ice as he stared at the young man, who was looking back at him with eyes filled with ridicule. "Yes, a competition," 13 answered. "A fair competition. And what is this competition you're talking about?" Wendell, who wanted nothing more than to smack the arrogant teenage boy whom he thought was a good child just a few days ago, asked with a sneer. "What you say better be good, Zion, or else I will kick you out of the Battalion Federation, and you will no longer be welcomed here ever again." 13 smiled and raised his index finger once more. "This battlefield only needs one commander," 13 stated, "so let's decide who will be the one to lead this counterattack by a little competition that will give the Battalion Federation another major advantage." Wendell and Renz narrowed their eyes as they waited for the teenage boy to finish whatever he was going to say. However, their patience was growing thin with each passing second. "The first one to kill or defeat another rank 8 sovereign will be the supreme commander of this counterattack," 13 declared. "Let's even put a deadline to this competition, 1 month. Within the next month, whoever defeats a rank 8 sovereign first will be the winner." The people inside the room couldn't believe what the boy had just said. A rank 8 sovereign was as strong as a monarch. Yet he was suggesting that the first one who'd defeat such a creature would lead the expedition force to conquer the north of the continent. And what if no one managed to achieve that feat in a month? Renz, who was unfazed by 13's declaration, asked. "Then you win by default," 13 shrugged. "Do we have a deal?" "Sure. But how about we raise the stakes a bit?" Renz smiled. "If I win, you will become my subordinate." "How's that?" "I don't mind," 13 answered. "But if I win, you will become my subordinate, and you have to call me young master." "How does that sound?" "You have a deal." "Good." 13 and Renz exchanged smiles with each other. The strategist of the Battalion Federation was certain that even if he didn't do anything, 13 would become his subordinate after a month. The boy was a very popular person in Pangea, so having him as a subordinate would bring him some perks. Little did he know that 13 already knew what Renz was thinking and was also laughing in his heart. With Arthur, Michael, and Hans by his side, although it would still be a little difficult, it was not impossible to kill a rank 8 sovereign. Trevor Remington smiled faintly and clapped his hands together. "This sounds like a fun competition," Trevor stated. "So, I will make an announcement. Whoever wins this competition will have the support of the Remington clan in regards to securing a stronghold in the north. I will also give full support to whoever wins in this competition," Lawrence declared. "The central government will also help reclaim the northern lands." Wendell knew that if he gained the support of the two monarchs, there would truly be an opportunity to gain a foothold in the continent. However, killing a rank 8 sovereign was far from an easy feat. Even with the full might of the Battalion Federation, countless lives would be lost if they attempted such a thing. He gave his brother a glance, and the latter only smiled and shook his head. That gesture was enough to tell Wendell that Renz didn't plan to attack the Rigel continent completely and would just wait for Zion to lose the bet. Earlier, he felt enraged because 13's words were condescending. The teenager had reminded them that they wasted many years in a futile struggle, which was a bitter pill to accept. He couldn't even refute the teenage boy's words. Those who were not part of the Dvalin Federation thought that what they were doing was indeed a futile struggle. But Zion's declaration made him realize how serious the boy was. "I want everyone to not share anything that has been talked about inside this room," Wendell stated, surprising everyone. Renz arched an eyebrow, but he didn't say anything else. Deep inside, Wendell wished that Zion would be the one to win the competition. If he could really kill or defeat another rank 8 sovereign, that meant that he was truly competent. Just like the boy mentioned earlier, it would also give the Dvalin Federation another major advantage. If Zion could really do it, Wendell wouldn't mind taking orders from such a person, even if that person was only 13 years old. Besides, it would also send a signal to the rest of the world that a new era was about to begin. "Zion, let me ask you a question, my boy," Trevor Remington said with a smile. "Can you really devise a strategy to kill or defeat a rank 8 sovereign?" 13 glanced at the monarch of the Aldebaran continent with a confused look on his face. "It's just a rank 8 sovereign," 13 said with a frown. "How hard can that be?" That casual rhetoric almost made everyone in the room cough up blood. After all, none of them could defeat a rank 8 sovereign so easily. The current monarchs, with the exception of Lawrence Seaton, had reached their rank through freeloading. This was the reason why they weren't as battle-hardened as the monarch of the central government, who had fought on the front lines during the fateful day when the world first faced its first genocide-level threat. Self-aware of their lacking ability, they never risked their lives to fight against the other genocide-level threats, which had led to the Jinns and Magians successfully conquering the continents of Antares and Rigel. If they were dealing with rank 7 sovereigns, the monarchs would not hesitate to fight them. However, if they were rank 8 threats, they would think twice before making a move. In short, they were people who bullied the weak and feared the strong. 13 was even certain that when the rank 8 sovereigns descended upon the Signy continent, only Lawrence Seaton and the current monarch who ruled the Signy continent, Douglas Griffin, would give their all when fighting rank 8 threats who descend. They would only fight half-heartedly and would retreat once their lives were in the slightest hint of danger. The world would once again experience the downfall of another continent, and Jinns and Magians would have another continent under their rule. As much as 13 hated the monarchs, he had to admit that the current Pangea still needed them. Since his preparations weren't complete yet, he would leave them alone for the time being. Once his preparations were completed, the world no longer needed to worry about any calamities equivalent to a genocide-level threat. 13 understood the importance of the upcoming invasion in the Signy continent. The moment their defenders failed to stop the conquest of the Jinns and Magians, Pangea would no longer have any future. The Wanderers would lose heart and would dreadfully live their lives waiting for the next genocide-level threat to fall upon the Sirius and Aldebaran continents. Not wanting to let that happen, 13 planned to become the supreme commander and take full control over the armies of the world. This was also why he had purposely provoked Renz Elrod and initiated a competition with him. In the future, he would also face similar opposition. Because of his age, people subconsciously wouldn't want to entrust their lives to him. There was a saying that desperate times called for desperate measures. This was one of those times, so 13 had to do something to make the big shots of the world truly recognize his abilities. Only then could he use them as pawns for the battle that would happen in 3 years. Rank 9 sovereigns might still be too much for them, but rank 8 shouldn't pose a problem if done right. 13 thought as he walked the hallway of the Leventis aircraft carrier, followed closely by Arthur, Michael, and Hans. Right after the discussion in the Dvalin Tower ended, the young man ordered his subordinates to relocate to the Leventis naval fleet so that they would be able to join the expedition that 13 had planned in mind. "Gramps, please stand guard outside the door," 13 said. "No matter what you hear inside, do not go in." "Understood," Arthur replied as he stared at the door of 13's room. "Will it take long?" "I don't know," 13 answered, "but I will come out as soon as I'm done. Until then, make sure that no one will interrupt me." Arthur nodded. "Very well." Right after the teenage boy entered the room, Arthur and Hans stood guard to ensure that no one would disturb him. Michael, on the other hand, went to the control room to confirm if their ships had been properly resupplied with food, ammunition, and other important resources. While everyone was getting ready for their departure in the morning, 13 activated the ring of the apocalypse on his finger. A second later, he found himself in the conference room of the apocalypse, where some of the members were having a discussion. 13. It's been a while. Kamisats happily walked toward the teenage boy and lightly patted his shoulder. When are you coming back to Solterra? I'm ready for another adventure. Kamisats had earned a lot of apocalypse points in the Battle of the Arcadia Archipelago, allowing him to unlock the third layer of the treasury. The other members of the Order were surprised about this development. Kamisats had not been in their organization for a long time, yet he already managed to be on the same level as some of the other members who had also unlocked the third layer of the treasury. There is something that I will need from you, Kamisats, 13 said solemnly. I need to borrow your you-know-what. The deathbat immediately frowned. He knew that 13 was talking about the armor that he gained from fighting against the Artemian sovereign, Zazriel, who would have ended Kamisats' life if it weren't for 13 coming to his rescue. How long will you need it? Kamisats asked. Obviously, he was hesitant to part with it. The armor was what enabled him to deter his neighbors, who had ganged up on his territory as soon as he returned to his domain. Ever since he gained the armor, he felt invincible. As expected from his suit of divine equipment, he was nigh untouchable as long as he was supplying a bit of his life force to it. Equipped with such overpowered armor, the deathbat hadn't hesitated to attack his aggressors. He had decimated their forces and made them submit to his rule by force. 3 years after the battle in the Arcadia Archipelago, Kamisats had finally stabilized his domain. Those who wished to defy him had long pledged allegiance to him, including 2 Magian princes. Not more than a month, 13 replied. I promise I will return it. Fine, Kamisats nodded before dragging 13 towards the treasury, where Metatron would keep their transaction private. Any negotiations or deals done between the members of the Order of the Apocalypse were done in his presence, in order to ensure that none of them would break their agreement. Those who do would lose their qualifications as members, and their tokens would be handed over to the person whom they had wronged. When they arrived at the treasury, they immediately saw the Birdman standing near its gate. The moment it saw 13, it immediately rushed to attack the boy, but its clawed hands stopped a foot away from the human boy's head. What's wrong? 13 asked in a teasing tone. Can't hurt me. Damn you, the Birdman said through telepathy. It's all your fault. Of course it is, 13 replied. But before anything else, why don't you kneel first? I will never kneel to you, the Birdman roared. However, as soon as he said those words, he felt a pressure descend upon his body, forcing him to kneel. 13 then looked at the kneeling monster with amusement and lightly tapped the Birdman's right cheek. What's wrong? 13 asked. I thought you weren't going to kneel to me. Kill me, the Birdman shouted. Just kill me. Why would I do that? 13 smirked. I'm sure you already tried to kill yourself many times, right? But what happened? You can't die, right? The Birdman glared at the human boy, which made 13 chuckle. No one could kill anyone within the Order of the Apocalypse, because Metatron wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. Even if someone died, they would just revive as if nothing had happened, because in this world Metatron was God, and everyone in it would need to play by his rules or risk incurring his wrath. The Birdman was resentfully glaring at the one responsible for his suffering when Metatron appeared in front of 13 and Kamisats with a smile on his face. Congratulations, 13, Metatron stated. You have just unlocked the 4th level of the treasury. Is that the reason why you've come here? It's one of the reasons, yes, 13 nodded. I have a deal with Kamisats, and I need you to bear witness to it. Very well. Metatron made a gesture for the two to start their deal. The Guardian of the Order of the Apocalypse listened to the details of the agreement and placed his mark on the armor. The mark made it so that the armor would automatically return to Kamisats regardless of where it was once the agreement had reached its due date. 13 knew that his grandpa would definitely be reluctant to return the armor to him, so he decided that it would be best if he asked Metatron's help to retrieve it just in case Arthur refused to return it. After the deal was sealed, Metatron then patted 13's shoulder. Since the 4th layer of the treasury has been unlocked in the past, You will not be getting its first clear reward, Metatron stated. But you are the sixth person who has cleared the fourth layer, so you will get the consolation prize. Metatron then snapped his fingers, making the first 4 layers of the pyramid open, allowing 13 to access their inventory. You may take 1 item from each level of the treasury, Metatron stated. For the first and second layer, I want a capture sphere as a reward, 13 said. Metatron nodded and bestowed upon him the capture spheres, which had been responsible for bringing Albion and the Birdman inside the treasury of the apocalypse. I will take a pass on picking a reward on the 3rd layer, but I want to check what it is inside the 4th layer, 13 commented. Metatron nodded and clapped his hands, sending the boy inside the treasury to pick his reward. Since 13 could only use pseudo-divine and divine items, Metatron segregated the rewards and only showed him the things that were useful to him. As he skimmed through the inventory, 13's eyes widened in shock. He just saw something that wasn't supposed to exist in Solterra. As if reading his thoughts, Metatron appeared beside him and chuckled. "Didn't I tell you?" Metatron inquired. "The rewards you can get here don't only come from this world. It belongs to many worlds. However, only those who have unlocked the 4th layer of the treasury could enjoy these artifacts." 13 didn't hesitate to reach out his hand to the glowing green crystal orb with countless binary numbers floating around it like the rings of a planet. The green orb originated from a highly advanced technological world that had colonized countless planets. It was a creation sphere that could literally change the genetic and material makeup of anything it was imbued to, allowing those who had it to create anything they wanted. Naturally, there was a limitation to it. It could only create things when there was enough information and data added to the sphere, allowing it to create whatever the user wanted. The more detailed the information, the more complete the creation would be. It was also a power source, a nearly limitless power source that had the power equivalent to that of a star. For example, if the creation sphere was used as Nautilus power source instead of an Imperium, it would never run out of power again. Countless thoughts and possibilities swam inside 13's head as he held onto the creation sphere in his hand. "Metatron, just tell me one thing," 13 said as he glanced at the guardian of the treasury of the apocalypse. "Do you have more than one of these in the treasury?" "No," Metatron replied in a heartbeat. "That's the only creation sphere that exists in the treasury." "Then, how come the other members of the apocalypse who opened the 4th layer didn't choose this?" 13 asked, his voice almost hoarse. "It's because they don't know how to use it," Metatron replied. "They're unable to explore its countless possibilities because their knowledge is only limited to what they know from their home world and the world of Solterra. Only someone like you, who understands its true potential, can appreciate it for what it truly is. For them, it's just a shiny, glowing sphere. Picking something that will not be useful to them is a waste of reward. Don't you think so?" 13 held the creation sphere in his hand firmly and nodded. "I will be taking this with me." "Excellent choice," Metatron replied as he rested his hand on the teenage boy's shoulder and whispered in his ear. "Since it's a pseudo-divine artifact, your restrictions will not be able to do anything to it. Enjoy your reward, Zion. I look forward to the day when you finally open Pandora's box." With a snap of his finger, Metatron sent 13 back to the entrance of the treasury, where Kamasats was waiting for him. "So, are you done?" Kamasats asked. "Not yet," 13 replied. He had already hidden the creation sphere in his dimensional storage because he didn't want anyone to see it. The teenage boy approached the Birdman, who was still kneeling on the ground. "Are you lonely here?" 13 asked as he showed the Birdman the 2 capture spheres in his hand. "Tell me, who among your comrades would you like to be sent here with you?" 13 smiled evilly as the Birdman looked at him with a solemn expression on his face. "It doesn't have to be a friend, you know," 13 said in a teasing tone. "Do you have someone you hate the most among the 7-rank 8 sovereigns in the Rigel continent? I'm willing to listen to your request, you know? Since you're already suffering here, why don't you let them suffer with you?" Kamasats subconsciously shuddered. The teenage boy was definitely more devious than him when it came to manipulating others. Directly support the authors on webnovel. If you can't decide, why don't you tell me more about your comrades? 13 inquired. One or two of them would be joining you here. So, why don't we have a nice, long chat about them? What do you think? The Birdman was starting to waver. The boy's words once again reminded him that he would probably be spending his lifetime in this place, never to return to his world. Since that was the case, he would want to bring some of his friends with him. That way, he wouldn't be lonely spending his eternity in a world where even death wouldn't be able to reach him. The Birdman, who goes by the name Zed, tried to resist 13's questions at first. Unfortunately, he was no match for the teenage boy who was a master interrogator and manipulator. Analyzing the psyche of the jinn as a means to break its defenses, 13 managed to pry the answers he wanted. The 8 kings who governed the Rigel continent had split the continent into 9 regions. The 3 rank 9 earth dragons controlled the biggest area, which was located at the center of the continent. According to Zed, the 2 sovereigns bordering those territories were a Magian manticore and a centipede jinn. These 2 would likely be the ones who'd take over Zed's territory, which had lost its ruler. Surprisingly, Zed got along really well with the Magian manticore. Perhaps it was because they shared the same ideals, and that was strength. In their point of view, power transcended everything. This was also why the Birdman couldn't accept his defeat in Zion's hands. The latter hadn't defeated him in a fight. No, the latter schemed against him. And as a warrior who only wished to fight strong opponents on the battlefield, he refused to accept it. 13 apologized to Zed for not fighting him fair and square, and it somehow reduced the Birdman's hate toward the boy. After 13's apology, the jinn became more cooperative. He opened up and soon started talking about the other kings of the Rigel continent. The one I hate the most is the brain beetle, Kuga, Zed stated. He's a schemer. The rank he has now isn't earned by his power, but by manipulation. There are other more fitting candidates who would have accompanied us in this invasion, but due to his eloquent words, our great master chose him to accompany us in our invasion. 13 nodded. I already know that only rank 8 and rank 9 sovereigns are allowed to pass through the dimensional gates at this point in time. Tell me, did you come from Solterra, or did you come from Gamara? Zed arched an eyebrow as he looked at the teenage boy who seemed to know more about them than most wanderers. Kamasats, who was also in the treasury with 13, frowned after hearing the name of their homeworld, which he had never seen in his lifetime. Most jinns who were born in Solterra came from the lineage of the jinns and magians who came from Gamara. They were the ones who invaded the world of Solterra hundreds of years ago, and only a handful of people knew about the existence of the main planet of the jinns and magians. Not many knew about this, and those who knew decided to keep it to themselves. The reason? Even if it was known by others, what could they do about it? How do you know that? Zed inquired. We're forbidden to talk about our origins, so it's impossible for someone like you to know about it. Even the jinns and magians from Solterra won't share such information. This simply can't because the Ancient Ones had sealed this memory from their heads. I know many things, 13 replied, but I don't know everything. With your reaction, it's safe to say that you and the rest of your comrades are indeed from Gamara. 13 frowned. Now that he knew of this information, he would have to change his strategy. It was common for people to assume that the monsters crossing through the dimensional gates only came from Solterra. But this wasn't true. Only 70% of the dimensional gates that appear in Pangea were connected from Solterra. The remaining 30% of them were connected from Gamara. The jinns and magians from Gamara were fiercer than the monsters in Solterra, for they were pure-blooded monsters. The jinns and magians of Solterra had bred with the other species upon their invasion, so their offspring were no longer pure-blooded. 13 also knew that the genocide-level gates that had appeared on Pangea were all from Gamara, and these were just the vanguards. Their masters were likely Magian princes and princesses. Of course, there was also a possibility that their masters were stronger than these princes and princesses, making them far more dangerous. It's a shame that I cannot ask Zed the rank of his master, 13 thought. He might become brain-dead if I force him to answer this question, and it's pretty dangerous to ask about it to begin with. These higher beings have a way of recognizing those who manage to learn their names. The teenage boy pondered a bit before asking Zed another question. So about this brain beetle, what can he do? 13 asked. Is he capable of mind control? How did you know? Zed asked back. It seems that you know many things about us. Just who are you? It's not that hard to come to this assumption, Zed, 13 answered. Brain beetles are also common in Solterra. They rarely leave their lair, but they are the most annoying monsters to fight. Those with weaker minds would be dominated by them and become their puppets. 13 frowned before asking Zed another question. Aside from him, who do you think is the strongest among all of you? 13 inquired. That beetle is not the strongest. Zed growled. He's just a manipulator, a coward who hides behind his subordinates. Any warrior who gets close enough to him can kill him easily. Then tell me, if the two of you fight, can you kill that brain beetle? 13 crossed his arms over his chest. Zed glared at him, but didn't answer the question. This meant that even the Birdman, who believed that strength was absolute, didn't have the confidence to kill or defeat the brain beetle in battle. What is the brain beetle's name, and where is its domain located? Its name is Nan Nan. His territory is in the southeast region of this continent. Do you want him to accompany you here? 13 inquired out of pure curiosity. I want him dead. Zed growled. Easier said than done, 13 commented, but I'll see what I can do. For now, tell me everything you know about the centipede, the manticore, and the brain beetle. I can tell you what I know about the centipede, but I won't tell you any information about the manticore, Zed stated. If you want to know more about him, you have to fight him on your own. Then tell me this. Will this manticore accept a one-on-one battle? 13 eyed the Birdman, making sure that he would be able to tell whether he was lying or not. Amos will not be afraid of a one-on-one battle, Zed replied. Even the monsters who obey him only recognize strength as the law of the world. 13 nodded before bidding Zed goodbye. Kamasats glanced at the Birdman once before following behind the boy who had borrowed his armor from him. It seems that you are up against some weaklings, Kamasats commented. Make sure not to die, okay? 13 scoffed at the words of the shameless death bat. While rank 8 sovereigns might indeed not be a problem for Kamasats, they were truly dangerous creatures in 13's eyes. This was why he decided to get some insurance and asked Metatron for 2 capture spheres. If things took a dark turn, he would then use the spheres to send the kings to the treasury of the apocalypse, trapping them inside forever. However, if possible, 13 didn't want to use his capture spheres. After all, he could only take 1 treasure a year from the treasury. I hope that Gramps can successfully deal with the centipede and the manticore using the Artemian armor, 13 thought. The only problem is the brain beetle. I can't take a gamble and have Gramps fight it. If he falls under its control, all my plans will be ruined. The teenage boy sighed. If only he were fighting against rank 8 sovereigns who solely used brute force, then he had a way of defeating them. Those who specialized in mind control were very difficult opponents. For the time being, he decided to focus his attention on the 2 kings bordering Zed's territory, which was located in the northern region of the Rigel continent. After leaving the Order of the Apocalypse, 13 once again appeared inside his room. Glancing at the clock on the wall, he sighed in relief after seeing that only a little more than an hour had passed. He then approached the door, intending to tell his grandfather that he needed to talk with him. However, when the door opened, he found 3 people facing off against Arthur and Hans, which made the teenage boy narrow his eyes. It was none other than the Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal of the central government. However, there was one more individual accompanying them, Benedict Riggs. By the looks of it, he had come on his own. Why don't all of you come inside? 13 asked. My room is a bit small, but I'm sure that it can accommodate all of us at the same time. Arthur and Hans nodded and entered the room without saying a word. The Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal exchanged a glance with each other before following suit. Benedict was the last to enter the room. Before taking a seat, he made sure that the door was locked properly behind them so that no one would be able to overhear their discussion. The patriarch of the Riggs family, Hugo Riggs, wanted to pass a message to Zion and asked Benedict to deliver his message to him. He hoped that after the teenage boy heard his message, he would realize that even though there had been some tension between the Dvalin Federation and him earlier, all of them wished that he would succeed in his endeavor. After all, the teenager's success would also allow them to recover what they had lost. It would also give hope to the people who were thinking that their world could only just sit back and wait for annihilation. Sirs, is there something you wish to talk to me about? 13 saluted the Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal, who reciprocated his salute before answering his question. You left the Dvalin Federation before we had the chance to talk, Lawrence replied. Fortunately, they were kind enough to lend us one of their helicopters so we can discuss a few things with you. Benedict volunteered to take us here. Also, he said that he wanted to talk to you about the bet you have with Renz Elrod. 13 nodded in understanding. So who wants to go first? Lawrence glanced at Benedict, feeling the eyes on him. The latter politely gestured for the Grand Marshal to speak first. After receiving the cue, the head of the central government asked 13 a question, which he didn't expect. Do you want to take command of the Valkyries for the time being? Lawrence asked. Marion sent me a letter of resignation. I know that she's feeling guilty and maybe depressed about the death and suffering of her subordinates, but I don't wish for her to leave her post. She's a very competent soldier, and I hope that she'll be able to overcome the shadow of the tragedy that befell upon her division. But I can't possibly force her. So, for the time being, I thought that the Valkyries should have a substitute leader. I want you to help them regain their confidence and their willpower to fight against our enemies. Would you like to lead them for a period of time? I don't mind, sir, 13 replied. But if I'm going to do this, I would like Commander Marion to become my assistant. Understood. The Grand Marshal nodded. I will convince her. 13 then shifted his attention to Benedict, who was listening quietly from his side. Uncle, what do you want from me? 13 asked. The corner of Arthur's lips twitched after hearing his no-good grandson call his past love rival uncle. Benedict, who didn't miss Arthur's moment of irritation, smirked before telling his reason for coming to see the teenage boy. I came here to tell you that the Riggs family is willing to extend our help in your attempt to subjugate one of the kings of the North, Benedict stated. I know how Renz operates. I'm sure that he will just wait for the 1-month deadline of your competition and play it safe. Frankly, I don't blame him for doing so. After all, we just lost many elite soldiers. The loss was not only from the incident that happened a few days ago, but also from the previous battles that we waged many years ago. The help that the Riggs family can give you might be limited, but as long as we are able to do it, we will offer our assistance. Will this not cause a rift between the Riggs family and the rest of the Dvalin Federation? 13 asked. It won't, Benedict replied with confidence. All of us vowed to reclaim the lands that were taken from us by the Jinns. Renz is not a petty person. I'm sure he will genuinely support you if you can really defeat another king. After all, we would have another serious threat to deal with once we decide to take control of the northern regions. 13 nodded as he motioned for everyone to follow him to the table inside his room. The young man then took off his communicator from his wrist and placed it at the center of the table, after which he clicked a button. A projection of Rigel Continent's map was put into display. The territory of the Birdman, which we will call Zed for the time being, is here. 13 pointed at an area in the north. He dragged his finger over it, giving it a green shade. These are the territories he used to rule, and this will be the range of our expansion. 13 then lightly tapped the northeast and northwest regions, which bordered the Birdman's territories. Currently, there are 2 major threats that we need to deal with to gain a firm stronghold in the north, 13 explained. In the northeast, there is a Magian Manticore, while in the northwest, there is a Jinn Centipede. They're the kings governing these 2 areas. If we want to make this operation successful, we need to take 1 or 2 of them out of the picture. 13 then pointed at the southeast corner of the map, which made Benedict frown. The king governing this area doesn't have any offensive abilities and can be easily killed by a master or grandmaster, but it's a very dangerous creature, 13 stated before giving Benedict, whose face had become pale, a sidelong glance. The Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal wore solemn expressions as the image of the creature who had foiled their previous expedition to regain the Rigel continent appeared before them. The Brain Beetle, 13 stated. This guy is more dangerous than the rank 9 sovereigns when it comes to warfare. Although those rank 9 Earth Dragons are truly powerful, the Brain Beetle has a more horrific ability. It could control monsters and humans. I don't need to explain the specifics, but unless we take this guy out, we won't be able to succeed even if we take out the centipede and the manticore. Everyone inside the room nodded. They wholeheartedly agreed with the teenage boy's declaration. I will find a way to deal with the brain beetle, but for now, I need to prioritize winning my bet with Ren's Elrod, 13 said. Only by doing so will I gain the full cooperation of the Dvalin Federation and the central government. So, which king will you be targeting first? Lawrence, who was impressed by the young man's explanation, asked. The manticore, 13 replied. When will you deal with it? Benedict inquired. Do you need our help? No. 13 shook his head. The Leventis family will deal with him alone. Can we not help you? Lawrence crossed his arms over his chest. I don't think that the Dvalin Federation will mind if I lend my assistance in this matter. Rihanna and Shauna's father, Tristan, nodded in agreement with his grandfather. I know that we declared that the central government will help you if you win the bet, Tristan stated. But we won't be helping you as members of the central government. Our identity will be mere two individuals who wish to give humanity a chance. 13 pondered a bit before nodding his head. Okay, the two of you can come. Then I will also go. Benedict volunteered. The young man shook his head. No, I don't want to make the Dvalin Federation think that I only won the bet because I managed to get a lot of help, 13 stated. I'll only accept the Grand Marshal's and Field Marshal's assistance. Benedict sighed in his heart and reluctantly nodded in understanding. Very well, but when will you start your operation against the Manticore? Benedict asked. In a week, 13 replied. The rest of the naval army of the Leventis family will be arriving at that time. I plan to use our family's entire might to crush that rank 8 Manticore. After laying out his plans, Benedict finally bade goodbye and left to return to the Dvalin Federation. Lawrence and Tristan were about to do the same, but 13 stopped them from leaving. What is it, Zion? Lawrence asked. Do you still have something to tell us? Yes. 13 smiled. Please prepare yourselves. In an hour, we will be infiltrating Manticore's lair. The Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal looked at him in surprise. Didn't you say that you will only start the operation after the naval forces of the Leventis family arrive? Tristan asked. I lied. 13 then pointed at Arthur and Hans, who hadn't said anything during the discussion. The 5 of us is enough to deal with the Manticore. You're not taking me with you? Michael asked as he fixed the glasses on his face. No, Uncle, 13 answered. I need you to stay in the aircraft carrier. Your role is to make sure that the Dvalin Federation doesn't notice anything amiss and make them believe that we're doing anything but conducting a night raid in Rigel continent. 13 didn't need to wait for a week to deal with the Manticore because what he needed was an elite group of people who would be able to come and go as they pleased. A team composed of a monarch, 2 thrones, a champion, and a legendary rookie was more than enough to deal with the Manticore. After telling them about the plan in his mind, the group sneaked out of the aircraft carrier during the night. They soon reached the northern regions of the Rigel continent, from where they'd head toward the Magian Manticore, whom 13 believed to be the ideal opponent for their current lineup. Sir, before we start this operation, I would like to share a secret with the 2 of you. 13 looked at the Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal of the central government, who told him that he didn't need to address them as his superiors. However, 13 still decided to show the 2 of them the proper respect that they deserved and let them know a few of his secrets. Once his connection with the 2 top dogs of the central government became firm and unshakable, he would be able to do many things with their assistance. Feel free to tell us anything, Lawrence stated. My granddaughter, Rihanna, never stopped praising you after she returned from Solteris 6 years ago. I swear that even if you just sneeze, she would think that you did it on purpose because she believed that you always have a reason for whatever you do. 13 chuckled awkwardly. It seemed that Rihanna was overpraising and overestimating him too much. However, since this wasn't the time and place to talk about such things, he decided to just get straight to the point. I have a few helpers with me, which the Laplace demon helped me smuggle into Pangea, 13 explained, making Lawrence and Tristan instantly become serious. I'm going to call for him, so make sure to not attack him. He will play an important role in our operation, 13 said. The The two military men nodded their heads in understanding. After confirming that his friend was going to be safe, 13 raised his hand and pointed at the ground beside him. "Come out, Rocky," 13 ordered. A moment later, the magma Balboa, who had been waiting for them deep underground, emerged to the surface. "I see. So this is where your confidence is coming from," Lawrence smiled. "Is this the same monster who found the Imperium and Palladium mine?" 13 nodded. He wanted to raise Rocky's importance to Lawrence and Tristan so that they would ensure Rocky's safety. A monster who could find precious ores and metals underground was an important military asset. In the two men's point of view, that trait alone made the magma Balboa a treasure that must be protected. 13 didn't mention that Rocky had just turned into a rank 7 sovereign a few days ago after absorbing the cores of the rock, as well as the other flying monsters that the Valkyries and the 69th Battalion had fought. "This monster is a magma Balboa, and his name is Rocky," 13 replied. "It's a living creature, not an avatar, so don't mistake it for one. There's still a few things that I need to say, but let's talk about it inside Rocky. This place is not safe, and there might be people overhearing our conversation. Rocky, I'm going in." Rocky nodded and opened its mouth wide, allowing 13 to walk inside its gaping mouth. "Come in," 13 said. "Don't worry, and just follow me." Arthur and Hans, who were already aware of Rocky's mobile fortress, followed Zion without a word. Lawrence and Tristan glanced at each other before following suit. As soon as they entered the magma Balboa's mouth, Rocky immediately dug to the ground, disappearing from sight. It headed toward the northeast direction, where the Magan Manticore was currently resting inside its lair. After entering the magma Balboa's body, Lawrence and Tristan couldn't help but be surprised. They didn't think that they would find themselves in a miniature world. Inside that world, there were 5 monsters who were currently sleeping: a blaze skunk, a nightmare blackhound, an adamantine tiger beetle, and 2 ogre juggernauts. The 2 ogres were rank 5 sovereigns, while the remaining 3 monsters were all rank 6 sovereigns. "So, these are the monsters that the Laplace demons smuggled from Solterra?" Lawrence asked. 13 nodded as he pointed at his friends one by one. "This is Giga, Blackie, Hercules 01, and 02. They are my guardians who ensure that I won't be kicking the bucket anytime soon." Tristan couldn't help but shake his head helplessly now that he had seen the teenage boy's hidden forces. "These 5 monsters, excluding the magma Balboa, are enough to keep you safe here in the Rigel continent as long as you won't fight against rank 8 and rank 9 monsters," Tristan commented. "Now I understand why you're not so worried about bringing your battalion into this monster-infested land. You have the ability to protect them if the worst-case scenario happens." "That's right." 13 nodded. He didn't even bother to deny the field marshal's words, because lying wouldn't help build trust between them. "My daughter, Rihanna, is right about you." Tristan crossed his arms over his chest. "You don't do anything without a reason. It seems that I will have to reevaluate you again." "Sir, your daughter overestimates me." 13 smiled faintly. "It will be best if you don't think I'm capable of defeating rank 8 and rank 9 sovereigns, because frankly, I can't do that. At least not now." "Not now." Lawrence arched an eyebrow. "Does that mean that in the future, you'll be able to defeat them?" 13 nodded. "If I'm given time to grow, then yes." "Is that also the reason why you've joined the central government?" Lawrence inquired. "So you'll have time to grow." 13 nodded for the second time, which made the 2 highest-ranking officers of the central government chuckle. "Your grandson is good at using people to his advantage," Lawrence said to Arthur, who had his arms crossed over his chest. "You're not wrong," Arthur replied. "I can't count the number of times I wish to smack his head out of anger. If not for the fact that I'm worried that he will lose his intelligence if I do that, I wouldn't be holding back." Tristan smirked after hearing Arthur subtly tell them about Zion's importance to their family. "I know that it might look bad on the surface, but I wish that the central government and the Leventis family could form stronger ties after this expedition," 13 stated. "Right now, we need the help of dependable people whom we can trust to not strike us from the back when we least expect it the most." Lawrence, who had experienced the first genocide-level battle in Pangea and lived to see how it ended, fully understood what the boy was implying. Because of this, he glanced at Arthur and gave the latter a brief nod. After this, let's talk about how to strengthen the cooperation between our two factions, Lawrence said. Very well, Arthur replied. Just make sure that this no-good grandson of mine will be able to live for a few more years under your wing. He's a troublemaker, so make sure to plant some competent people to watch over him. Tristan chuckled, because he was also thinking along these lines. After some of Zion's hidden trump cards were revealed, his strategic value within the central government drastically increased. Little did they know that 13 had more, which he didn't plan on sharing at this moment in time. Now that is settled, let's talk about the battle against the Manticore King, 13 said. Gramps, you will be fighting him alone. Make sure not to die. That's it. The four adults didn't know what to say, having expected that they would be having a detailed strategy meeting on how to deal with the Manticore King and his subordinates. However, Zion only told them that Arthur would fight against it alone and said nothing else. That's it. Arthur asked as if confirming that he didn't hear his grandson's wording wrongly. That's it, 13 replied. According to the data I gathered, the Manticore is a Magian who believes in the concept of strength supremacy. If you challenge it in a one-on-one duel, it would accept your challenge and order his subordinates to not interfere with your duel. All you need is to beat the crap out of it. Then we escape with its body in tow. Easy, right? Arthur pondered for a bit before nodding. Sounds like a plan. The Grand Marshal and the Field Marshal wanted to say more, but seeing that 13 seemed confident in this strategy, they decided to just watch from the sides. Hans, who had seen for himself the things that 13 could do, chose to remain silent. His duty was to ensure that the boy would remain safe during this night raid, and he would do everything in his power to keep him safe from harm. Suddenly, Rocky sent a mental message to his master, telling him that they were near their destination. 13 then informed everyone to prepare, because they would be ejected from Rocky's body at any given moment. A few minutes later, Rocky once again made his report to his master, who immediately told everyone to brace themselves. We're here. Prepare for battle, 13 ordered. As soon as he said those words, he and the rest of the Wanderers found themselves being sucked upward, toward the sky of the miniature world. A moment later, they found themselves in what seemed to be a wide, open space surrounded by cliffs, preventing anyone from leaving the place. I didn't expect that I would be receiving uninvited guests tonight. A voice filled with amusement reached their ears, forcing the Wanderers to look to their right side. There, standing on a hill-sized boulder, stood the 5-meter tall Manticore King, who was staring at them with a devilish grin plastered on its monstrous face. Amos, we have come to challenge you to a one-on-one duel. Tall Manticore King, who was staring at them with a devilish grin plastered on its monstrous face. 13 declared as he pointed at the Manticore, who was gauging the strength of the people who suddenly appeared in his domain. Oh, you know my name? This is quite surprising, Amos commented before raising his clawed paw to point at Lawrence, who it deemed as the strongest human in the group. Is he the one who will fight me? No. Arthur took a step forward and gazed at the Magian Manticore fearlessly. The one who will fight you is me. Amos glanced at the old man and narrowed his eyes. A few seconds later, it laughed and spread its wings wide. You smell of blood and the battlefield. Amos smirked. Very well. You are a worthy opponent. Suddenly, countless monsters appeared above the cliffs, overlooking the battleground that looked like a nature-formed coliseum. The monsters all roared in unison, as if wishing to join their king in battle. However, Amos roared back at them, silencing them all. Don't interfere, Amos ordered. This is a duel. Anyone who interrupts my battle will die. The djinns and magians who served Amos quieted down. However, half a minute later, all of them once again roared. This time, they were cheering for their king, who was about to fight a battle to the death with the foolish humans, who had arrived to become its prey. 13 glanced at Arthur before making a gesture for Hans, Lawrence, and Tristan to follow him. He led them to the side of the clearing, where they would observe the battle from afar. When Amos deemed that no one was going to interrupt its battle, it roared before jumping off its stone platform. I am Amos the Slaughterer, Amos declared. And you are Arthur Leventis. Arthur replied as he summoned his greatsword, shield, and the armor that his grandson had handed to him before they went on this expedition. And today, I will take over your title as Slaughterer. Amos laughed out loud after hearing his opponent's declaration. It had been a long time since it had fought to its heart's content, so it was quite excited to find someone who was looking at it with the same battle-hungry eyes that it possessed. Arthur Leventis, make sure that you don't die right away, Amos declared. Entertain me for as long as you can. I didn't come here to chat, Arthur stated. So shut up and fight. Amos grinned before it flapped its wings to propel itself forward. Arthur didn't hesitate to also charge forward to meet his opponent halfway. The patriarch of the Leventis family had always fought at the front of the battlefield and never shied away from a head-on confrontation. After realizing that the Manticore was someone like him, his eagerness to exchange blows with his opponent only fueled the determination in his gaze. The sound of two metallic weapons clashing reverberated in the surroundings, marking the start of one of the greatest battles that Arthur would have had fought in his lifetime. Are those mythical armaments? Tristan's eyes widened in shock as he stared at the great sword, shield, and armor that Arthur equipped. Lawrence, who owned one of the supposed only 6 mythical armaments in the world, was just as shocked as his son. He had thought of countless possibilities, but this was something that he didn't think he'd see when he decided to accompany Zion in his night raid. The 6 monarchs were not only powerful because of their ranks. It was also because they possessed mythical ranked gears, which greatly boosted their fighting prowess. And now, Arthur Leventis was holding not just 1, not just 2, but 3 of them, which would make the 5 monarch clans mad with greed. They are, 13 replied, which made Tristan's body stiffen. Of course, he didn't bother correcting them. There was no point telling them that the armor wasn't a mythical ranked equipment, but a pseudo-divine armor, which was 2 levels higher than the gears owned by the monarchs. Ow! Lawrence, who finally regained his composure, asked. It was during the battle in the Arcadia archipelago, 13 stated. The leaders of the Artemians were carrying those items, so my grandpa just picked them up after they dropped them. You make it sound like your grandfather just casually picked them up from the ground, Tristan said in disbelief. 13 smiled faintly because his excuse was fail-proof. There was no way that he would tell his 2 superiors that the great sword and shield in Arthur's possession were crafted by his father, Gerald, and further enhanced with his rune magic. The Artemians were the perfect scapegoat for his explanation. After all, no one could prove otherwise that he wasn't telling the truth. I'd appreciate it if the Grand Marshal and Field Marshal can keep this as a secret, 13 commented. Right now, the status quo must be maintained. Humanity must unite as one, so we can't have conflicts at this point in time because of greed. Lawrence and Tristan both nodded in understanding and shifted their focus back to the battle that was happening in front of them. Every time Arthur and the Manticore King clashed, a powerful shockwave would be generated, sending gusts of wind flying in every direction. Because of the battle's high intensity, 13 was forced to move behind Lawrence, using the monarch as a shield to prevent himself from getting blown away by the aftermath of the battle between the 2 powerhouses. Judging by the exchange between the 2, Lawrence and Tristan could tell that Arthur and the Manticore King were almost evenly matched. Almost was the most accurate term, given that Arthur had a small advantage over his opponent. He was even able to push the Magian back a few times during their clashes. 2 minutes later, Arthur and the Manticore King distanced themselves from each other. That armor of yours is interesting, Amos said. I managed to hit you 5 times, and during those times, I felt that my attack had been completely nullified. It seems that you came prepared to fight me. The Manticore sneered. It already deemed that as long as Arthur was wearing the silver armor, its attacks would not deal any damage to its opponent. You're right, Arthur replied calmly. But to 13's and the Manticore King's surprise, Arthur unequipped the silver armor from his body and replaced it with a red one. I don't need it to defeat you, Arthur declared before charging at the Manticore King with his sword and shield glowing in a golden light. Amos snorted and sprinted toward the old man, facing him head-on. This time, the outcome of the clash was quite different from the first. Arthur was now the one who was being pushed back, which made Lawrence and Tristan frown. 13, on the other hand, remained calm as he observed the battle from behind the monarch. I knew that this would happen, 13 sighed in his heart. Gramps can be too stubborn at times. There was no mistake that if Arthur fought normally wearing the Artemian armor, the Manticore King wouldn't be able to deal damage to him as long as he supplied it with a bit of his life force. The main reason why he chose to challenge the Manticore King was due to the fact that the conditions to emerge victorious were already set in stone. Now that Arthur had chosen to stop using the silver armor, his chances of winning had decreased drastically, making it a 50-50 between him and the Manticore King. A loud explosion spread in the surroundings as Arthur slammed at the wall that prevented anyone from escaping the battleground, where the Manticore King rested. You know now, don't you? Amos asked in a teasing tone. If you don't use that armor, your chance of defeating me is very small. Arthur propped himself up from the ground before spitting a mouthful of blood to his right side. Using that armor will not make me strong, Arthur replied. It will only make me weak because I will subconsciously rely on it. Also, let me correct that misunderstanding of yours. My chance of defeating you is not small. The Manticore King laughed because he liked Arthur's answer. Good, Amos said. Only weaklings need to rely on cheap tricks to win. The only thing we can believe in is our own power. The Manticore then brandished its scorpion-like tail, sending sharp projectiles in Arthur's direction. The patriarch of the Leventis family blocked and deflected these sharp spikes, then took a step forward, charging with his shield raised in front of him. Amos opened its mouth and unleashed a breath attack, similar to a dragon's breath. Arthur didn't bat an eye and charged at the Manticore King's attack. When the shield and the breath attack collided, Arthur's charge stopped completely in his tracks. The ground under his feet shattered as he did his best to tank the attack that was making his feet skid slowly on the ground. A moment later, Arthur roared as he forced himself to take a step forward, fighting against the momentum of the Manticore King's breath attack. Amos, who also understood what Arthur was trying to do, increased the output of his attack, resulting in an explosion. A mushroom-shaped dust cloud rose up from the point of impact, making Lawrence's and Tristan's expressions turn grim. Suddenly, the two heard a crisp, crackling sound behind them, which made them look at the teenage boy, who was casually eating some potato chips as if he was just watching a TV show. But just as Tristan was about to ask the boy what he was doing, he sensed a movement from the center of the dust cloud. From within that place, two glowing objects could be seen, making the Manticore King narrow its eyes. Wanting to take a better look, Amos flapped its wings to blow the dust clouds away, allowing him to see the aftermath of his attack. At the center of a crater, a bloodied Arthur Leventis knelt while panting for breath. His red armor had been reduced to almost nothing, revealing his toned body, which would make any bodybuilder look at him in envy. He was bleeding all over and was using his sword and shield to keep his body from collapsing completely. Although he looked injured and battered, a fearless smile could be seen on his face as he forced himself to stand. It's hard to fight when I'm giving a strong opponent a handicap, Arthur said after he regained his breath. Zion, I think it's fine if I unseal it, right? No, 13 replied in a heartbeat. But if you want to be second-rate for the rest of your life, Gramps, go ahead and do it. Arthur clicked his tongue before wiping the blood that was seeping at the corner of his lips. Fine, Arthur commented as he raised his sword and pointed it at the Manticore King, who was looking at him with a solemn gaze. I'll end this fight with my next attack. So if you have any trump cards, make sure to use them now. Amos smirked. Very well. Let's end this battle with a bang. Arthur grinned as he took a fighting stance. Suddenly, the crater where he stood expanded as the ground around him shattered. 13 had given him the divine martial technique, Heaven's Blade, and it had two special moves. The first one was Overdrive. This was the Heaven's Blade Berserk ability that raised its user's strength and speed multiple times for a short period of time. It was a move that should be used as a last resort because once it was used, there was no turning back. Arthur would have to defeat his opponent or die, trying because the moment the effect of Overdrive disappears, he would no longer have the strength to lift even a finger on his body. The Manticore King soon realized that Arthur wasn't just all talk, so it decided to also unleash its berserker rage, shattering the ground under its feet as well. I think we should get out of here, 13 proposed. Lawrence didn't hesitate to grab the boy and jump toward one of the cliffs, where a few monsters were cheering on their leader. Tristan followed behind his father, ready to attack the monsters if they made any move against them. Fortunately, none of the monsters attacked them. They even moved back a bit to create a space where Lawrence and Tristan could land. After sensing that the monsters weren't hostile to them, the three shifted their attention back to the battlefield and waited for the final clash between Arthur and the Manticore King.